the White House meeting in the Oval Office that he desperately sought. This for that. President Trump has repeatedly insisted that his July 25th conversation with President Zelensky was a perfect call. His staff at the White House apparently believed otherwise. The press office issued a short and incomplete summary of the July 25th call. Let me read it for your hearing. Today, President Donald J. Trump spoke by telephone with President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine to congratulate him on his recent
Senate will be in order. The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery.
And the scripture says, "For the Lord loves justice and will not abandon his faithful ones." Official White House call readout, July 25th, 2019. Today, President Donald J. Trump spoke by telephone with President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine to congratulate him on his recent election. President Trump and President Zelensky discussed ways to strengthen the relationship between the United States and Ukraine, including energy and economic cooperation. Both leaders also expressed that they look forward to the opportunity to meet. That is the official White House call readout dated July 25th, 2019. The official readout provided to the American people omitted key elements of the president's conversation. Let's review. The official readout did not mention the phony investigations requested by President Trump. The official readout did not mention the Oval Office meeting sought by President Zelensky. The official readout
Welcome
did
back.
not mention
We had to do a little bit of a
elevation
switchover.
of a
We are now only on YouTube. There was some kind of an issue with our Twitch stream. This is part 2 of day 3. We're just doing it on YouTube for now. YouTube super chats will show up over there. We're still carrying over everything that happened previously, including welcoming Max Dawn, who is new member number 89. Hopefully this part 2 of the stream will get us to the 100 new members. We'll go back to Hakeem Jeffries, and we are expecting a break close to the bottom of the hour. We are back just on YouTube now.
The complete conversation, however, between President Trump and President Zelensky that we just outlined offers powerful evidence that President Trump abused his power and solicited foreign interference in the 2016 election, the 2020 election. Several members of the president's staff listening in on the call immediately grew concerned. As he sat in the White House Situation Room listening to the conversation, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman realized that the president's demands of the Ukrainian leader were inappropriate and improper. He quickly recognized that as the president began referencing the Bidens and CrowdStrike, the call was diverging from the official National Security Council approved talking points that he helped prepare. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, 20-year Iraq War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and American patriot. He testified in the context of the call that due to the unequal bargaining position of the two leaders and Ukraine's dependence on the United States, the favor that President Trump sought would have been perceived by President Zelensky.
So we did have a protester. Let's see if we can quickly check out what happened. I think I have video of it.
President Donald J. Trump spoke by telephone with President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine to congratulate him on his recent
Senate will be in order. The sergeant at arms will restore order in the gallery.
All right, and that probably is all that they will really give us of it. They don't, I'm sure, want to promote or encourage this sort of thing. Let's get back to the audio here.
That if Ukraine pursued an investigation, it was also clear that if Ukraine pursued an investigation into the 2016 elections, the Bidens and Burisma, it would be interpreted as a partisan play. This would undoubtedly result in Ukraine losing bipartisan support, undermining U.S. national security, and advancing Russia's strategic objectives in the region.
Recounting the content of the call based on his detailed handwritten notes, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman told the lawyers that he believed it was wrong for President Trump to ask President Zelensky to investigate Vice President Biden. Other witnesses were also troubled by what they heard. Vice President Pence's advisor, Jennifer Williams, expressed concern that President Trump raised a domestic political matter on an official call with a foreign leader. She testified that the mention of investigations struck her as unusual and possibly political in nature. She said, "I guess for me, it shed some light on possible other motives behind a security assistance hold." Timothy Morrison, a former Republican congressional staffer who replaced Dr. Fiona Hill in July of 2019, also reported the call to National Security Council lawyers. After the call, President Trump continued to push the scheme forward. On July 26, the very next day, Ambassador Sondland and Ambassador Taylor met with President Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials in Kyiv. According to David Holmes, the Ukraine-based U.S. diplomat who served as the note-taker, the Ukrainian leader mentioned that President Trump had brought up some very sensitive issues during the July 25th call. Very sensitive issues. Ambassador Sondland then had a private meeting with Andrei Yermak, President Zelensky's top aide. The two men insisted that the meeting be one-on-one with no note-taker, perhaps due to the sensitive issues that might come up. Ambassador Sondland testified that he and President Zelensky's aide probably discussed the issue of investigations. After these key moments in Ukraine, Ambassador Sondland went to lunch with David Holmes and two other American officials. Mr. Holmes sat directly across from Ambassador Sondland, close enough to hear the details of an extraordinary telephone call between Mr. Sondland and President Trump. As Mr. Holmes relayed during his sworn testimony under oath, Ambassador Sondland pulled out his unsecured cell phone and said that he was going to call President Trump to give him an update. What happened next was shocking.
Well, Ambassador Sondland's phone was not on speakerphone. I could hear the president's voice through the earpiece of the phone. The president's voice was loud and recognizable. And Ambassador Sondland held the phone away from his ear for a period of time, presumably because of the loud volume. I heard Ambassador Sondland greet the president and explain he was calling from Kyiv. I heard President Trump then clarify that Ambassador Sondland was in Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland replied, yes, he was in Ukraine, and went on to state that President Zelensky, quote, loves your ass. I then heard President Trump ask, so he's going to do the investigation. Ambassador Sondland replied that he's going to do it, adding that President Zelensky will do anything you ask him to do.
He's going to do it. He will do anything you ask him to do. Immediately after this call with President Trump, Mr. Holmes followed up with Ambassador Sondland.
After the call ended, Ambassador Sondland remarked that the president was in a bad mood. As Ambassador Sondland stated, it was often the case early in the morning. I then took the opportunity to ask Ambassador Sondland for his candid impression of the president's views on Ukraine. In particular, I asked Ambassador Sondland if it was true that the president did not give an expletive about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland agreed that the president did not give an expletive about Ukraine. I asked why not. Ambassador Sondland stated that the president only cares about big stuff. I noted there was big stuff going on in Ukraine, like a war with Russia. And Ambassador Sondland replied that he meant big stuff that benefits the president, like the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani was pushing. The conversation then moved on to other topics.
During the July 25th call, President Trump asked for the favor of these two phony political investigations immediately after the Ukrainian president brought up defense assistance for Ukraine. And the following day, Ambassador Sondland confirmed to President Trump that Ukraine would indeed initiate the investigations discussed on the call, which was the only thing President cared about with respect to Ukraine. He didn't care that Russia was forcefully occupying eastern Ukraine. President Trump didn't care that thousands of Ukrainians apparently have died fighting for their democracy. He didn't seem to care that supporting Ukraine bolsters America's national security. But he cared about himself as it relates to the prospects of his reelection in 2020. In November, President Trump denied that he spoke to Ambassador Sondland on July 26, telling reporters, "I know nothing about that." But in his public testimony, Ambassador Sondland contradicted that assertion with official records he obtained from the White House. Ambassador Sondland further explained that Holmes' testimony refreshed his reelection about the July 26 call, which Ambassador Sondland had not originally described when he first appeared at a deposition before the House.
Also, on July 26, shortly after our Kiev meetings, I spoke by phone with President Trump. The White House, which has finally shared certain call dates and times with my attorneys, confirms this. The call lasted 5 minutes. I remember I was at a restaurant in Kiev, and I have no reason to doubt that this conversation included the subject of investigations. Again, given Mr. Giuliani's demand that President Zelensky make a public statement about investigations, I knew that investigations were important to President Trump.
We believe, heading to a break. They were going to take a break at the bottom of the hour, which was 4 minutes ago. We anticipate that it'll be soon, and then I will answer questions. We may take phone calls. We'll do a whole bunch of different stuff. I don't know why milk is the only drink other than water allowed in the Senate chamber. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if flavored milks would be allowed or if they would be considered flouting the rules to some degree. Maybe a question we can explore. Super chats will show up over there if you send them. Embarrassingly, that entire gray box on the screen is empty because there's no super chats. It's an incredibly embarrassing situation that hopefully people can help remedy. But we will get the super chats, maybe live calls, and a whole bunch of other stuff. This is part 2 of day 3 of the Trump impeachment trial. We're listening to Hakeem Jeffries.
To target an American citizen for political, personal gain. In a perfect call, the president would not solicit foreign interference in the 2020 election. In a perfect call, the president would not threaten the well-being of a highly respected American ambassador and say that she was going to go through some things. In a perfect call, the president would not praise a disgraced former prosecutor who the free world viewed as corrupt and incompetent. And in a perfect call, the president would not have directed a foreign leader to follow up with Rudolph Giuliani, a human hand grenade. This was not a perfect call. It is direct evidence that President Donald John Trump corruptly abused his power and solicited foreign interference in the 2020 election.
Wow. Wow.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. Chief Justice, colleagues will now take a 30-minute break for dinner and reconvene at 5 minutes after 7. So I ask consent the Senate stand in recess until that time.
Without objection, so ordered.
An incredible third day of Donald Trump's impeachment trial. We are now...
And the House impeachment prosecution managers have about 24 hours to present their case against the president.
Yes. Okay. So anyway, we were in a 30-minute break, and we can now get all caught up on everything. I will answer questions coming in via Super Chat. We will hopefully get to our the highest goal we've ever had for new members on a stream before has been 50. And we are just continually rolling over our impeachment goal, which is now at 100. We're only 11 away. We've never in the history of streams had 100 new members up on the board. So maybe we can do it. And in fact, I say we just knock it out before they even come back and continue after their dinner. What Mitch McConnell will be eating, known colloquially as a turtle, will he be munching on carrots and lettuce, or will he have a proper meal? I couldn't tell you, but we will soon find out, I am sure. Renholder57 sends a super chat and says, "Thanks for the commentary, David." My pleasure. Marika L, who is still here. Marika L, if I recall correctly, Marika L is in somewhere in Northern Europe, where it is probably between midnight and 1 a.m. right now. Marika says, "I'm too tired to ask a thing, but great work on the streams." Thanks, Marika. Always great to see you here. And we will see what the last portion of today brings. I'm trying to think how late they're going to go. Indulge me in a moment to run the math. If they're doing 8 hours a day of opening arguments, and today is day one, they were scheduled to start at 1. I don't think they actually started until about 1:15 or 1:30. 8 hours would get us to 9:30. They already did like a 20-minute break, call it 30. That gets us to about 10 p.m. They're doing a half-hour break now, which would get us to about 10:30 p.m. And there have been a couple of other short interludes where I guess the timer may not be running. So I think it's not unreasonable that this would run until sometime between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. maybe. But I'm glad to hear thoughts from other people about how late you expect this to go. Ryan Henry Dean says via Super Chat. Oh, let's see. That's not on screen. There we go. Ryan Henry Dean says, "I think he will do a combination of lettuce and carrots." Caval's Tam says, "Make sure you stay hydrated, David. Much love." Yeah, I'll take a quick sip. Very important to sip water. David Tillery says, "David, thoughts on how we shorten this process?" I don't think there's any. Listen, if I don't know how we're going to make it through this, because it is going to be excruciatingly long. It could be 5 weeks. We're talking about 3 days of Democratic opening arguments, 3 days of Republican opening arguments. Then they are supposedly going to be debating witness subpoenas and document subpoenas. That could be another couple of days. That gets us to 8 days. Senators will have 16 hours to ask questions. I'm guessing that'll be 2 8-hour days, which would be 10 days. That's 10 actual days of stuff. But that doesn't even include debate and discussion, rather testimony from witnesses. And presumably there will be some witnesses. You could be talking about 10 or 15 days of that. It could be 3 weeks. It could be 5 weeks. We just don't really know. We don't really know. Thank you to Todd Carpenter for signing up for a YouTube subscription using the join button down below. Remember, website memberships, which are up there, are separate from hitting the join button below. We are targeting 100 website memberships. And I want to say thanks to Nicole Binder, who is new member number 90. We're just 10 away. It looks as though Donald Trump is doing something, I guess leaving Davos, or maybe who knows what he's doing. Let's see if they're saying.
I don't know.
All right,
And,
that's Chris
Clinton.
in Dover, New Hampshire, taking a political angle on what we're listening to. Stripling, Everett, Washington, Republican.
Was that Trump getting back to the White House? That is interesting if Trump is back. Just while we have the time, maybe we will look at Donald Trump's Twitter account and see if he's been tweeting anything. Always good to get caught up. And then we will continue with the Super Chats momentarily. Donald Trump saying thank you to the World Economic Forum, retweeting total bomb thrower Doug Collins, retweeting Senator John Barrasso, retweeting more of Doug Collins, retweeting Marsha Blackburn a couple of times, Bill Cassidy, Dr. Bill Cassidy, Senator Ted Cruz, Sean Hannity. Okay, so all of the sort of normal stuff that you would expect, saying if anybody comes to the U.S.-Mexico border, they're going to be sent back if they're part of that caravan. Okay, so nothing hugely surprising or shocking there. Mostly the stuff that we would expect to see from Donald Trump. Once again, there was a protester. Let's see if we can just find that video. Impeachment protest. We'll take a quick look at that. Here it is.
Trump spoke by telephone with President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine to congratulate him on his recent
Sergeant at Arms will restore order
I
in
can't
the
understand
gallery.
a word that guy said. Does anybody in the chat know what was actually said? I'm just going to pay attention to the chat for a moment here to see if anybody has any idea what it was that was said there. I think I heard the word Trump in that screed, although, we're on the wrong window. Although I am not completely sure. So, somebody says they think Jesus Christ was mentioned. That's possible. Overturn something. Yeah, the word overturn might have been in there. Jesus Christ something. Oh, a lot of people think it was a religious nut. That's interesting. Yeah, let's play it one more time. And we have time here. Let's see.
President Donald J. Trump spoke by telephone with President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine to congratulate him on his recent
Sergeant at Arms will
Jesus Christ something overturn, I think is what I heard. And some people saying they heard the word noises in there, but I don't think I heard the word noises in there. Oh, he said iPhone's 50% off with the trade-in of a Mac Pro. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. I do think that I heard that. Okay, we are in a break. We're not missing anything. We are about close to 6 hours into this entire thing today. For the next 20 minutes or so, any questions or comments or ideas about what we've seen today, please submit them via Super Chat. That's the $ at the bottom of the chat window. If you are, which I guess is over there, if you're on a desktop computer, it's an overlay on your mobile phone. If you're watching on mobile, you hit that $, and then when you type in a message, however you do it, type it in or, whatever, it'll pop up right over there, as these fine folks' messages have, including David Tillery and Kavol Tam and Ryan Henry Dean, and of course Marika from Northern Europe, who is a staple of the streams. And we also have an impeachment. Are we celebrating impeachment? I'm being told we're not. We're not celebrating impeachment, but we're commemorating impeachment, maybe better said. With the coupon code IMPEACH50, we have a goal of 100 new members on my website, joinpacman.com. The coupon code IMPEACH50 saves you 50%. And I will just take a moment to show you exactly how that works. You could do monthly or yearly. I say do yearly because you save more, but it's completely up to your preference. You hit the sign up button. When given the option, you type in the coupon code impeach50. And when you click off, you will see that $60 becomes only $30 for an entire year. And if you do a monthly membership, $6 a month becomes just $3 a month for the entire year. 90 people have done it so far. And it would just be amazing if we finished filling up this bar right here. We are 90 divided by 10, 9 divided by 10, 9, 0, carry the 0, 0, 0 is 90. Okay, so we're 90% of the way there, actually. That the math was simpler than it appeared to me. Other super chats coming in. Renholder 57. Let me see. Is Renholder on screen? Now I'm actually concerned that we can't actually see something. Oh, I see what happened. Nope, that's not the right chat. There we go. Okay, there we go. Renholder 57 says something about Roe v. Wade, perhaps. I don't know exactly what that means. James Buccino says, hey, David, were you ever into Yu-Gi-Oh? Yu-Gi-Oh, I don't know what that is, or Magic the Gathering in high school or anything. No, I was not into Yu-Gi-Oh. A former producer, Lewis, made me play Magic the Gathering once or twice. It was not my thing. It was not my thing. Although I was able to tap his mana, and he never forgave me for it. Young, Dumb, and Baroque, welcome back. That's a username I recognize. Is there a chance of the Democrats asking Roberts for a mistrial? I doubt it. I doubt it. It hasn't occurred to me before, but I highly doubt it. Let me say thanks to Matthew Mayo. Mayo, of course, delicious topping for sandwiches and all sorts of foods. Matthew Mayo, member 91. Member 91 of 100. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yuika Gauss sends a super chat in Swiss francs and says, just another super chat. Every time I see Swiss francs super chats come in, I'm reminded of the delightful times that I've had in Switzerland. It's just such a great country. The food was terrific. The people were terrific. Pricey, not a place where you are likely going to get away on the cheap, for sure, but a beautiful, beautiful country. My time in Switzerland mostly spent in Zurich and Lugano. And Lugano is just an amazingly picturesque place, which I would recommend to everyone. I would recommend everyone go to Lugano as soon as possible. Truly, the sooner you can get there, the better. Let's listen. Actually, well, we could listen to C-SPAN callers for a moment, but also the voicemail number continues to explode. Let me see if there's any new voicemails that I want to play. Yes, very clean in Switzerland as well. People pointing that out are completely correct. Let's see. Actually, I don't think we have too many new voicemails to play that have been coming in while we've been doing the stream. Let me check the other spot. Let's see what other voicemails we've got here. How about, that racist Sam Cedar caller did leave a voicemail. Let's just listen to it.
Hey, Dave, I'm glad that on Martin Lucifer Coon Day, you decided to talk.
Nah, Martin Lucifer Coon is not going to get you very far on this show. We'll just cut it. Not appreciating that. Jesse Dotson is new member number 92. Thanks, Jesse. Really appreciate it. 92, looking for 100 new members today. A few other super chats coming in. M. Gray says, can you explain a post facto rationalization? Yes. Okay. So we've mentioned this term a few times over the last couple of days, interestingly enough. A post facto rationalization would be, post facto means after the fact. So a post facto rationalization would be an explanation for something that you come up with after the relevant event has taken place. So, for example, a post facto rationalization would be like if I, let's say that yesterday, actually I'm having trouble coming up with a good example. Let me just see what examples are online. Post facto rationalization. Let's see what examples there are. I'm actually struggling to find a good one. Post facto rationalization. What is it? I don't want to use one that is even more confusing. Does anyone in the chat have a good example? So let's see, a good example. All the ones I'm coming up with are just going to confuse people even more. Post facto rationalization would be, in the case of Trump, if Trump does something that appears to be illegal or unethical, and after the fact, you retroactively come up with a reason why he did it that is seemingly benign, you've evaluated later in the most favorable terms possible why you believe Donald Trump did something. But of course, the fact that you're doing it later makes it invalid because you already have an agenda that you're trying to carry forward by couching what he did in the least offensive or damning terms possible. I still don't think this is great. Let's see if there's any other examples that are coming in via chat. What people get hypnotized to do something like opening an umbrella and returning to their chair. Yeah, these are not good examples. In any case, I think I've maybe confused people even more. But let's go back to it. It's been a long day. Ryan Henry Dean says, I hope people aren't holding out to be member number 100. That would be horrible if people were doing that. Let me say welcome to Sarah Officer, and Jordan Desernay, who are new members number 93 and 94. That gets us, look at how little that space is right there. It's almost like off screen how close we are to 100 new members at joinpacman.com. We are at number 94. David Tillery sends a super chat and says simply beer money. Thanks, David. Yuka Gauss says also visit Lucerne in Switzerland. Yeah, I'd like to go to Lucerne. I've never been to Geneva. There are a lot of places actually in Switzerland that I would absolutely love to visit. Let's listen to just a little bit of Senator Ted Cruz.
One last observation. Yesterday, Representative Nadler threw up great indignation. And he said, out of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian companies, how can it be that President Trump was just concerned with this one company, Burisma? Well, the obvious answer that the House managers ignore is Burisma was the only Ukrainian company that had the son of the vice president that had real prima facie indications of American corruption. We're not talking about some abstract interest in any sort of corruption that might exist in Ukraine, but if you have a sitting vice president making public policy decisions to benefit his family to the tune of $1 million a year, that raises a serious question of corruption, and a president not only is justified in asking for that to be investigated, but has a responsibility to see that that's investigated. And that was a question not about Ukrainian corruption, but a question about American corruption, and Ukraine being integral in helping investigate whether there was, in fact, American corruption. I think we're going to hear another day.
So when you're not playing to the cameras, if you usually would look at the reporter who asked a question, but Cruz is just playing to the cameras.
Senator, you said that will you force a vote to try to subpoena Hunter Biden?
The decision on calling witnesses is a decision in the first instance for the parties and for the parties' counsels. And so the question on calling Hunter Biden is going to be a decision for President Trump's lawyers to make initially if they ask to call Hunter Biden. If they ask to call Hunter Biden, if they ask to call the whistleblower, if they ask to call other potentially relevant witnesses, then the Senate will have to make a decision whether to grant that request. I don't think the Senate should force the parties to call witnesses that their lawyers don't make the decision to call. But I do think the Senate has an obligation to conduct a fair trial. That means to respect due process. You know, it was striking.
Oh, give me a break. It is not a fair trial. Guys, they suggested not debating which witnesses to call until after both sides have presented their case. What about that strikes you as an even remotely fair trial? Let me say thank you to Bill Ebeling. Bill Ebeling is new member number 95. We are 95% of the way to 100 new members using that coupon code IMPEACH50. IMPEACH50. Let's just do it. Let's just get to that number 100. Timmy Lunsford says via Super Chat, say one nice thing about President Trump. His amber-colored skin reminds me of a beautiful sunset. How about that? Robert Agozzino Guitar sends a $19.99 super chat with no question or comment. Thanks, Robert. I appreciate the support very much. We are in a break from the impeachment trial, scheduled to go from 6:35 to 7:05. Question in the chat, just a little levity because this is going to be dozens and dozens of hours. Who of the senators do you think is having the weirdest dinner? This is a dinner break. I know we joke about Mitch McConnell's a turtle and he's having a dinner of carrots and lettuce, but who do you really think is the senator likely to be having the most bizarre dinner of all during this 30-minute break? And we are expecting this to resume in about 10 minutes. All of the breaks have been longer than announced, so realistically, it could be even longer. If you're just joining us, please remember to hit the like button. Only 153 likes on this stream. That's not great, but I know we're going to start making our way to a couple thousand. So make sure to hit that like button. It does help this stream be recommended by YouTube over others. Scott White says via Super Chat, David, assuming Trump is not reelected, what are your thoughts on Trump being indicted once out of office, particularly at the state level in New York? You know, if you make me bet on it, I don't think any of it happens. I believe that the most likely scenario is the only opportunity to hold Trump accountable is to vote him out in November. He is not going to be convicted in this trial. He is not going to be indicted. If he is indicted, he's not going to be convicted criminally after he leaves office. The only opportunity to really have a consequence for Trump, we're talking about him like he's a little kid, is to remove him in November. If he gets another 4 years, he'll get the 4 years. He'll be outrageously extreme, and then he'll be out, and that'll be it. I would not count on anything else. Rain H says, it cracks me up whenever you're petty towards an unruly caller or to Trump. All right. Glad I'm entertaining you. M. Gray asks, how can they eat in only 30 minutes? Are they getting delivery? I'm guessing staff has something waiting for them. They must have something waiting for them. A lot of people think that Ted Cruz probably is having the weirdest dinner. Amy Klobuchar is eating salad with a comb. That makes sense. Bernie's eating Soviet bread from 1959. Okay, that's pretty funny. Ted Cruz is eating Trump's behind. Fair. Cruz is sucking someone's blood for dinner. Some of these I can't even say. Chicken nuggets, I don't even really understand that. People are eating Trump's taco bowl. Yeah, that's a good way to suck up to Trump. Have one of his favorite Trump Tower taco bowls, I guess flown in from New York City. Who even knows? Okay. Scott Phillips says, this is my third super chat. I was going to waste it to point out you didn't read my last two, but it's all good. Scott, I've been trying to read every super chat. The only ones I think I didn't get to may have been lost in the transition from a double stream here and on Twitch over to YouTube, and I apologize for that, but I was not aware of having missed any. I was not aware of having missed any super chats whatsoever. But I sincerely apologize. Let's take a listen to a couple of these phone calls coming in and see what's going on.
You know, but when you're seeing them introduce these things, the way they're handling themselves right now, it's very interesting, and it makes one think, you know, what is going on? What's the right thing to do here?
All right. Hey, Yolanda, one side question. You're down there in West Palm Beach. Have you ever seen the president when he visits Palm Beach, when he comes down to Mar-a-Lago?
Well, actually, I see the airplane most of the time, you know, because they always park it at Southern Boulevard, you know, and but yeah, no, I haven't really had that opportunity. As a matter of fact, now that you're on the air, I also wanted to say that when he first, let me tell you, I was a Democrat and I voted Republican. I switched because of all the stuff that was going on.
And
I'm answering your questions. How about
Jay
that?
Sekuloff going to say a word or two.
Is the president's defense team open to witnesses at this point, or are you ruling out calling witnesses?
We don't. Our position has been consistent. They've got to meet a burden to do that. We don't think they will. This is going to be a decision that the Senate makes, but we're prepared for any way it goes. We're ready to go. I mean, we've been ready to go for, you know, I've been ready to go for 33 days. So we're certainly ready to go now. We're glad at least the process started.
Do you want to call Hunter Biden?
We're not making any determinations on what witnesses we might call because we don't know yet their case. We're still hearing it. We'll see what happens. We don't even know if there will be witnesses. So we're just going to have to play that as it
Yeah,
goes.
if he gets his way, there will be no witnesses, which is absolutely and completely insane. Zudane says via Super Chat, greetings from Cape Cod. Curious if you've ever visited. Thanks for the commentary and for keeping my desk job interesting. Of course, I've been to Cape Cod probably 5 or 6 times. I'm going to try to think everywhere I've stayed. I visited Cape Cod. I'm going to try to go from inland all the way out to Provincetown. I've visited West Yarmouth for a wedding. There's a great cafe near West Yarmouth. I think it's called Snowy Owl in Brewster. Oh, are there a couple of them? Snowy Owl Coffee in Brewster, I believe it is. Yes. I have visited Chatham, or Chatham, as it's popular to say in some of our southern states. I've stayed in Wellfleet, South Wellfleet. I have stayed in, I visited Dennis. There's a great place for sandwiches called the Mercantile in Dennis. Tell them I say hi if you go. They have no idea who I am. I mean, no one there knows me, but just tell them I say hi. I love their sandwiches. And then, of course, Provincetown. Provincetown is a great place, and I've always been in the warm months, as is probably common for most people. And I appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. We are potentially 3 to 20 minutes away from the resumption. We are on Donald Trump's impeachment trial, day 3. I'm calling this part 2. And part 1 was before our Twitch stream got disconnected. Part 2 is after, where we are now just on YouTube. If you're just joining us, welcome. Please, before you do anything else, hit that like button. 361 likes right now. We're trying to get to 1,000 likes. Hit the subscribe button. We're trying to get to 800,000 subscribers by February 2nd, which is my birthday. And we're only a few thousand away. I think we should be able to do it. And if you want to support the streams, send a super chat. It'll show up over there. Or sign up at joinpacman.com. We have our most ambitious goal ever of 100 new members. See it up there? It's in blue and white. And we are 5 members away from getting to 100, which would be an historic accomplishment. Joinpacman.com is where you sign up. Epic Fails says via super chat, I love these former Democrats that Trump supposedly turned, I think is the implication. Yeah, a lot of them seem to call into C-SPAN. I don't know if I believe it. I mean, you know, it's a politically popular thing to say and politically convenient to say, you know, I used to be this, but it's gotten so bad that now I'm this other thing. And I think some people lie about that. They think they're being interesting. Some people are probably telling the truth, but it's actually a concern. If you, the Democratic and the Republican parties over the last 10 years, 12, 14 years, are so different, despite both perpetuating the status quo on many issues, that if you really switched from being a Democrat to a Republican in the last 10 years, I would wonder whether you're just really gullible and you were tricked, because I don't see how anyone could really have that sort of a political awakening. And I know that this refers, there are cultural critics and arbiters of ideas who have had, some of them are known to you because they have YouTube channels, who have had such political awakenings. I find it weird. I struggle to believe that's exactly as described, unless something is sort of wrong with the person. James Montalbano says via Super Chat, do you think that the Democratic elite would rather lose to Trump than Bernie? You know what's very interesting about that? I did a story yesterday on the show, and it's on yesterday's podcast, but the standalone YouTube clip is not publishing until, I'm taking a look, might be until this weekend. If you game out the 4 scenarios, meaning Biden is the nominee and wins, Biden is the nominee and loses, Bernie is the nominee and wins, Bernie is the nominee and loses, there is a game theory case to be made that progressives are best off with Biden being the nominee and losing in the long term. I'm not going to do the whole analysis now because I do it on the show yesterday and we'll publish that. But it's a very interesting question. I think this is Trump arriving back from Davos.
Convincing argument for you?
No, sir. I think Adam Schiff needs to be held accountable for his misinterpretation of words.
Oh, okay. There's a total lunatic on C-SPAN, so we'll mute that right away. I don't want to subject the audience to that. Let me say thanks to Blair Alana Clark. Blair Alana Clark is new member number 96. 96. out of 100 at joinpacman.com. Just 4 to go. 4 to go. I say we just blow up this 100 new member target before the Senate reconvenes here. Let's see. Other questions coming in. We were going to do a couple of other voicemails. Yeah, let me get back to that now that we have a little bit of a lull. But I will continue answering other questions that come in here. Let's see what this one's about.
David Beckman, did you hear Donald Trump just called himself a son of a bitch when he's welcoming the football team? He was insulted his mother and father highly. And did you see the expression on the football players' faces? They didn't like it.
Yeah. Let me see. This is actually fascinating. Trump football team. I just don't follow college football, so I don't even know. I don't even know what team it was, but Donald Trump had a football team that won something. Okay, this must be it. The LSU Tigers at the White House. And they seemed very unimpressed with what Donald Trump said. Let's take a look at a little video.
Joe Burrow.
Honor to be here, and it was a great season.
He's just giving me a jersey.
So, Joe, I just told the coach, we don't normally do this, but I'm doing it for this team. Anybody would like to come with me to the Oval Office?
So Trump starts talking about this, and all these guys behind Trump seem not to have any interest in going to the Oval Office at all.
In the Oval, it's a special place. There's no place like the Oval. They come from all over the world. They have their own big offices and everything.
These two guys in particular have no interest.
And they say there's no place like this. So, Coach, if you'd like, we can take whoever wants to come to the Oval Office. We'll take pictures behind the Resolute desk. It's been there a long time. A lot of presidents. Some good, some not so good. But you got a good one now, even though they're trying to impeach the son of a bitch.
These three
Can you
guys
believe
are not happy with what is going on here.
Got the greatest economy we've ever had, Joe.
Yeah.
We got the great.
Anyway, yeah, very, very funny video, and thanks for bringing it to my attention. I appreciate that. Hal says, with a $10 super chat, just what do you think you're doing, Dave? Dave, I really think I'm entitled to an answer to that question. Of course, anyone who has seen Stanley Kubrick's great film, 2001: A Space Odyssey, or read Arthur C. Clarke's great book, 2001: A Space Odyssey, would immediately recognize the reference. And man, what a series of books. I wish I could somehow, when there's a really great series like the 2001, if there's 4 books, is it called a quadrilogy? A lot of people don't know that word. Who do I sound like? When there's such a great series of books like that, I wish I could unread them and then read them again for the first time. 2001, its sequel, 2010. The third book, I think, is 2061. And then the 4th book in the series, 3001. Just fantastic. Really, really fantastic. Let's see other voicemails that are coming in. Let's see what else we've got here. Let's take a listen to this next one.
Hi, David. Big fan of the show.
Oh, this is a guy whose real name is Troy York, but he calls in with pretty bad voice acting and pretends to be different people.
Hey, I was wondering, did you hear or know that French President Emmanuel Macron was chased out of a theater by the Yellow Vest movement?
And I did actually see Macron had to leave a movie somewhere because of a security issue.
And for his life. I was wondering if you can report on that ever, or Angela Merkel or her unpopularity.
Yeah, we don't really do the day-to-day, like, this is mostly an American politics show. So like the day-to-day, what movie Emmanuel Macron went to, it's not really very high on the list of what we're doing. But I appreciate the concern, Troy, and always, am riveted by Troy's voicemails. Let's see other people who have called in. Let's see here. Take a listen to this one.
Hi, David. This is Ben Taylor calling from New Orleans, Louisiana. First, want to say I appreciate your show and your insight and all the hard work and others that I follow, like Kyle and Sam Sider. And,
Sam Sider. Hey, you know what's hilarious about calling him Sam Sider? Sam grows apples. Sam Cedar is like an expert in apple growing, and he knows about all these different types of apples. And once he and I got into a violent discussion about, I believe Granny Smith is the best apple, and Sam Cider believes that other apples are way better, including ones that are only available like between July 12 and 14. He said to me, he's like, if you like Granny Smith, it's amazing the conversation we had. Sam Cider said, if you like Granny Smith, there's a particular apple available like in upstate New York during 5 days in July, which you should get. And thanks, Sam. I'll look into that. But I love this idea of Sam Cider because Sam loves apples and knows a lot of things about apples. Let's continue.
But my question is, do you have any family members or maybe siblings or friends who are, you know, one of these cultist, Trumpist people? I have never known my mom to be really into politics her whole life, but all of a sudden, my uncle, her brother, has gotten her on this bandwagon, and it has really affected our friendship.
Yeah, no, I don't have that. My family is mostly Argentinian. So I have something that's arguably just as crazy, though, which is there are people in my family. Everybody's basically on the left, but I have people in my family who love CFK, Christina, and people who absolutely despise her. And so usually at most family things in Argentina, we have like a no politics rule, which kind of is lame because you would, you know, politics has been such a big thing in my entire family growing up, but it's gotten so bad. I'm actually going to text Sam Cedar about this Sam Cider thing. This is so funny. Someone left a voicemail calling you Sam Cider. Unironically. Ironically. Which is hilarious given your expertise in apples and apple related issues. We'll see what Sam thinks. Is Sam streaming? Does anybody even know? All right. We've got that off to Sam. Very, very good. The Senate will resume momentarily. I will take questions via Super Chat until that happens. We are just 4. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine how embarrassing it would be to me, not to you guys, if we ended up 4, we came 96% of the way to our goal. And imagine if we end up 4 new members shy. Let's not do that. We have a very special impeachment celebration coupon code, impeach50. And if you use that when you sign up at joinpacman.com, that number 96 will tick up and off the screen as we hit 100. Ben Taylor says, hey, that was me. Oh, wait a second. Oh, that's so funny. That was Ben who was calling. This voicemail was from Ben.
And it has really affected our friendship. I can't even have a conversation with my mom.
Well, Ben, that's a big matzo ball hanging out there. That's for sure. Let me say thanks to Jack Page, who is new member number 97. 97. We are inching closer and closer to our goal of 100 new members. How random that Ben left this voicemail. When was this? This morning. Oh, like almost 12 hours ago. And then Ben is also watching live right now. That I'm sure Ben is a very committed viewer of the channel. If on the same day that a voicemail gets played, you're also live on stream. I really appreciate that. Okay, we are anticipating the resumption of festivities in the Senate just about any moment here because they were scheduled to be back 10 minutes ago, actually. It's possible that Amy Klobuchar was not able to find a comb for her salad and ended up having to eat it with a fork, and that's taking maybe longer than we expected, but they should be back soon. And this could go at this, I mean, every minute now that this delay extends is probably another minute closer to midnight or 1 a.m. that this is going to go. Let's listen to a couple of other voicemails. Let's take a listen to this next one.
Hey, David. I just saw something concerning on your live stream about your trip to the dentist, where you said that you needed him to do you a favor. I just wanted to make sure if you can clarify that you said that you want nothing, you want no quid pro quo, to tell the dentist to do the right thing, and that's the final word from the host of the David Pakman Show.
That's exactly right. I called my dentist yesterday. We had a perfect phone call. And I did say, when they said, you know, I've not had dental insurance for 15 years because dental insurance is just not a good deal when you're a business owner, because it costs like $35 a month, but it usually has a maximum yearly benefit of like $1,000 or $1,200. So when you take 35 times 12, that's, you know, like $450. The max benefit is $1,000. You only benefit from dental insurance if you're paying for it yourself, if you spend exactly between $400 and $1,000. In any case, I've just been paying for my cleanings out of pocket and the occasional cavity. So when I called my dentist, they said, you know, you don't have dental insurance, you're going to owe us $95 or whatever for the cleaning. And I said, that's fine. I'm going to need you to do me a favor, though. And the call went very, very much downhill from there. Let me say thank you to Greg Peacosh. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. Peacosh, and Hillary Cowan. Greg and Hillary are new members 98, wow, and 99. New members 98 and 99. We are just one member away. Who wants to be member number 100 of the Impeach 50 promotion? Does anybody want to be new member number 100? In fact, I will say the following. Anybody, whoever becomes new member number 100, I will give you a free David Pakman Show t-shirt of your choice from our website. I will ship it anywhere in the world, reasonably speaking, I guess. Yeah, unless there's some weird place where we just can't get it to. Free t-shirt. Oh, dear. That's weird. What is that? Oh, I see. It's the Google Voice number ringing. Yes, whoever is member number 100 with Impeach 50, you'll get a free t-shirt or any clothing item, any swag item from the David Pakman Show store at it's like davidpakman.com/gear or /stuff, something like /store. I wish I knew how my own website worked. Okay, thank you for 2 new soy boys on YouTube membership, Peter Privitera, Misty Anderson, and Michael Stalker. Just to be clear, guys, when I say a free clothing item, I'm talking about website memberships at joinpakman.com. I don't think it's unrelated that I talked about memberships and people became YouTube members, but we're talking about joinpakman.com, new member number 100. Whoever is number 100 will get a free item from the David Pakman Show store. Ryan Henry Dean says, do you have any current YouTube producers, AKA 129 a month? Looking at perks and trying to see examples of existing producers' names in the credits. Oh, you would only see that if you watch the show on broadcast television. That's the only place where the credits actually show up. I don't remember how, we have some producers. I think we have like 2. Yeah, I think we have 2 producers. Yeah. Okay, if you're just joining us, any minute, any second now, we are going to get back to the Senate impeachment trial. They're in a break. It was a break for dinner, which was supposed to go from 6:35 p.m. Eastern time to 7:05 p.m. Eastern time. We're almost 15 minutes beyond that, and we don't know what's going on. Was there a food delivery that was delayed? Was there, I mean, it's anyone's guess what the delay is being caused by, but we're expecting them to resume momentarily. Because of this delay, it's very likely that this will go until 1 a.m. or potentially even later. I don't know how late it's going to go. Okay. All right. I think we have some folks who are all going to be arguing that they are member number 100, but unfortunately, only one person can be member number 100 because they come in order. So I will momentarily, I just want to make sure. Sometimes the emails get all out of whack. Okay, member number 100 is Dian Genev. Dian Genev is new member number 100 today. Dian, congratulations. Please get in touch by email at davidpakman.com and let me know what item, size, and color you want from the David Pakman Show online store. And in addition to that, let me know your shipping address. and we will get an item out to you. If you want a coffee mug or a T-shirt or a hoodie or whatever, we will get it to you. And very, very exciting. And on that note, let's just we're carrying over the membership goal. So 100 was the goal. Let's make it 1, 2, 3. How about 1, 2, 3 is the next goal for the impeachment 50 new members. Let's take a listen to a couple of the phone calls coming in on C-SPAN. Always a hoot.
And just to be clear, do you find what's going on right now a waste of time?
It's an exercise in futility. The Republicans have already formed a chain line of defense that you could bring in a smoking gun and it wouldn't matter, and they're going to sidestep it just the same way the Democrats would do it, because I'm here telling the truth about politics.
Enlightened
okay?
centrist on the
whole
phone.
thing has to change. It's corrupt from the fish to the top.
All right, it looks like they are reconvening. We are about to get started again here. Could be a long one. Who knows how long this is going to go. John Roberts sitting in and asking a question there. We see Jerry Nadler. Adam Schiff looks poised to do something. Oh, he is coming to the podium. We will hear again from Adam Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Just so senators have an idea of the evening, we expect to go about 2 to 2.5 hours. I'll make a presentation. Representative Lofgren from California will make a presentation. I'll make a final presentation, and then we will be done for the evening. As an encouraging voice told me, keep it up, but don't keep it up too long.
Right.
So we will do our best not to keep it up too long.
That applies to
I'm going to turn now to the
well.
part of the chronology that picks up right after that July 25th call, and walk through the increasingly explicit pressure campaign waged on Ukraine in order to get President Trump's deliverable, the investigations meant to tarnish his opponent and help his reelection. Now remember, by the end of July, Ukraine was aware of President Trump's requests for investigation to help his political efforts and had come to know that President Trump put a freeze on security assistance. So this is by the end of July. They also clearly understood that President Trump was withholding an Oval Office meeting until those investigations were announced. Both were very critical to Ukraine as a sign of U.S. support and as a matter of their national security. And their national security, of course, implicates our national security. In the weeks after the July 25th call, President Trump's handpicked representatives escalated their efforts to get the public announcement of the investigations from Ukraine. So let's go through this step by step, because the 3 weeks following the July 25th call tell so much about this pressure scheme. Let's start with July 26. On July 26, so this is the day after the call, Ambassador Volker sends a text message to Giuliani. And that text message says, "Hi, Mr. Mayor. You may have heard the president had a great call with Ukrainian president yesterday. Exactly the right messages as we discussed. Please send dates when you will be in Madrid. I am seeing Yermak tomorrow morning. He will come to you in Madrid. Thanks for your help, Kurt." So here we are the day after that call. As my colleague demonstrates, this same day, so July 26th, the date of that second infamous call between President Trump this time and Gordon Sondland that you heard the diplomat David Holmes describe. So that's same day, July 26th, that we're talking about right now, where there's this text message. Now, of course, in that July 25th call, the president wants to connect Rudy Giuliani with the president of Ukraine and his people. And so this is a follow-up where Ambassador Volker is saying to Giuliani, it was a great call with Ukraine president, exactly the right messages as we discussed. And we know, of course, those messages were the need to do this political investigation. Please send dates when you'll be in Madrid. I'm seeing Yermak tomorrow morning. He will come to you in Madrid. So here is Ambassador Volker, one of the three amigos, following up, arranging this meeting between Giuliani and the Ukrainians. Giuliani replied, setting a meeting in Europe with President Zelensky's top aide for the very next week. Quote, "I will arrive on August 1 and until 5, he wrote. Now remember, on July 22nd, so a few days before this and before the call, Ambassador Volker had connected Giuliani originally with Yermak, and they agreed to meet. So this is a follow-up. You have that arrangement being made by Volker and Giuliani before the call, then you have the call, and now you have the follow-up to arrange the meeting in Madrid. And so they do meet in Madrid. This is August 2nd. Andrei Yermak, Zelensky's top aide, flew to Madrid, meets with Rudy Giuliani, who they know represented the president's interests. Both Giuliani and Yermak walk away from this meeting in Madrid, clearly understanding that a White House meeting is linked to Zelensky's announcement of the investigations. In separate conversations with Giuliani and Yermak after this Madrid meeting, Volker said he learned that Giuliani wanted the Ukrainians to issue a statement, including specific mentions of the two investigations that the president wanted. According to Ambassador Volker's testimony, Yermak told him that his meeting with Giuliani was very good and immediately added that the Ukrainians asked for a White House meeting during the week of September 16th. Yermak presses Volker on the White House meeting date, saying that he was waiting for confirmation. Maybe you know the date. And this is a recurrent theme that we've seen through the text messages and other documents, and that is the recurrent request for this meeting, the pressing for this meeting by the Ukrainians because it was so important to them. Giuliani's objective was clear to Ambassadors Volker and Sondland, who took over communications with Yermak. Here's Ambassador Sondland.
I first communicated with Mr. Giuliani in early August, several months later. Mr. Giuliani emphasized that the president wanted a public statement from President Zelensky committing Ukraine to look into the corruption issues. Mr. Giuliani specifically mentioned the 2016 election, including the DNC server, and Burisma as two topics of importance to the president.
Giuliani exerted significant influence in this process. In fact, when on August 4th, Yermak inquired again about the presidential meeting, Ambassador Volker turned not to the National Security Council staff or to the State Department to arrange it and follow up. He turns to Giuliani again. Volker told Yermak that he would speak with Giuliani later that day and would call the Ukrainian president's aide afterward. Volker then texts Giuliani to ask about the Madrid meeting and to set up the call that he had mentioned to Yermak. Giuliani replies that the meeting with Yermak was excellent and that he would call later. Phone records obtained by the committees show a 16-minute call on August 5th between Ambassador Volker and Giuliani. Ambassador Volker then texts Yermak, "Hi, Andre. Had a good long talk with Rudy. Call anytime, Kurt." Separately, Volker told Ambassador Sondland, Giuliani was happy with that meeting and it looks like things are turning around. A reference to Volker's hope that satisfying Giuliani would break down President Trump's reservations concerning Ukraine. But things had not turned around by the end of that first week of August, by August 7th. The aid was still on hold, and there had been no movement on setting a date for the White House meeting. Ambassador Volker then reaches out to Giuliani to try to get things moving. Ambassador Volker texts Giuliani to recommend that he report to the boss, meaning President Trump, about his meeting with Yermak in Madrid. Specifically, he wrote, this is Volker writing to Giuliani, "Hi, Rudy. Hope you made it back safely. Let's meet if you're coming to D.C. and would be good if you could convey results of your meeting in Madrid to the boss so we can get a firm date for the visit." So this is Ambassador Volker following up Giuliani. Giuliani's met with the top aide to the president of Ukraine in Madrid, and he wants Giuliani to convey to the boss, to Trump, how good that meeting in Madrid was about the investigations so they can get the president of Ukraine in the door at the White House. Now, think about how unusual this is. This is the president's personal lawyer who's on this personal mission on behalf of his client to get these investigations in Ukraine. The president of Ukraine can't get in the door of the Oval Office. And who are they going to? Are they going to the Security Council? No. Are they going to the State Department? No. They tried all that. They're going to the president's personal lawyer. Does that sound like a official policy to try to fight corruption? Why would you go outside of the normal channel to do that? You wouldn't. No, you go to your personal attorney who's on a personal mission that he admits is not foreign policy when your objective has nothing to do with policy. When your objective is a corrupt one. Now, what does that mean, to have a corrupt objective? Well, it means an illicit one. It means an impermissible one. It means one that furthers your own interest at the cost of the national interest. The willingness to break the law, like the Impoundment Control Act, by withholding aid, is indicative of that corrupt purpose, the lengths the president would go, not in furtherance of U.S. policy, but against U.S. policy. Not even a difference on policy at all. The mere pursuit of personal interest, the pursuit of an illegal effort to get foreign interference, is the very embodiment of a corrupt intent. So here we are, August 7th. And Volker is saying, Rudy, if you're coming to D.C., let's get together. It'd be good if you can talk to the boss, because we can't get a meeting other way. Around that time, Ambassador Volker received a text message from Yermak, who asked him, and this is Yermak asking Volker, "Hi, Kurt, how are you? Do you have some news about the White House meeting date?" And Volker responds, "Not yet. I texted Rudy earlier to make sure he weighs in following your meeting. Gordon," meaning Sondland, "should be speaking with the president on Friday. We are pressing this." So there is, Gordon Sondland is pressing this. This is the man you've heard from already, Gordon Sondland, the man who says there was absolutely a quid pro quo. You've asked about a quid pro quo. There was a quid pro quo about this White House meeting. This is what they're talking about right here. Gordon will be speaking with the president on Friday. We are pressing this. Ambassador Volker's contact with Giuliani spurred a flurry of communications. The patterns of calls from August 8th strongly suggest Giuliani's attempting to call the White House to speak to a senior White House official, left a message, then had a 4-minute call with that official later that night. We don't know from the call records who that White House official was, but recall that Giuliani has publicly stated that when he spoke to the White House, he usually spoke to President Trump, his client. Also on August 8th, Yermak texts Volker that he had some news. Ambassador Volker replies that he can talk then, and Ambassador Volker updates Giuliani in a text the next day. Volker says to Giuliani in the text, "Hi, Mr. Mayor. I had a good chat with Yermak last night. He was pleased with your phone call. Mentioned," he's referring to President Zelensky here, "making a statement. Can we all get on the phone to make sure I advise," and here he's referring to President Zelensky, "correctly as to what he should be saying. Want to make sure we get this done right." So here, August 9th, there's an effort by Volker to make sure that they get the statement right about the investigations. Because if they can't get the statement right, he ain't going to get in the door of the Oval Office. It also makes clear who is exactly in charge of this, and that's Rudy Giuliani. Ambassador Volker is checking with Rudy Giuliani about what he should advise President Zelensky. And we know that Giuliani is taking his orders from President Trump. Text messages and call records obtained by the committees show that Ambassador Volker and Giuliani connected by phone twice around noon on August 9th for several minutes each. Following the calls with Giuliani, Ambassador Volker created a 3-way group chat using WhatsApp that included himself, Ambassador Sondland, and Yermak. Ambassador Volker initiated the chat around 2:20 that day. And this is Volker chatting with Sondland and Yermak. It's a 3-way chat. And Volker says, "Hi, Andre," meaning Yermak. "We have all consulted here, including with Rudy. Could you do a call later today or tomorrow, your afternoon time?" and Sondland says, I have a call scheduled at 3 p.m. Eastern for the three of us. Ops will call. Call records obtained by the committee show that on August 9th, Ambassador Sondland twice connected with phone lines associated with the White House. Once in the early afternoon for about 18 minutes and once in the late afternoon for about 2 minutes. We know that Ambassador Sondland had direct access to President Trump. After all this activity, Ambassador Sondland and Volker thought they had a breakthrough. Finally, a breakthrough. Minutes after this call, which was likely with Tim Morrison about a possible date for the White House meeting, Ambassador Volker and Sondland discussed the agreement they believed they'd reached. And starts with Sondland in this text message. Morrison ready to get dates as soon as Yermak confirms. Volker says, excellent, how did you sway him? Not sure I did, says Sondland. I think POTUS really wants the deliverable. Well, we know what that deliverable is. It's the political investigations. Volker says, but does he know that? And Sondland says, yep. Clearly lots of convos, meaning conversations, going on. And Volker says, okay, then that's good. It's coming from two separate sources. Ambassador Sondland told the committees that the deliverable required by President Trump was a press statement from President Zelensky, committing to do the investigations into the Bidens and the allegation of Ukraine election interference that President Trump mentioned on July 25th. But Tim Morrison testified that he didn't know anything about the deliverable. He was just involved in trying to schedule the White House meeting, which everyone wanted to schedule as a sign of support for President Zelensky and our ally Ukraine. But Trump's agents wouldn't just accept Ukraine's word for it. Ambassador Sondland then recommended to Ambassador Volker that Yermak share a draft of the press statement to ensure that the statement would comport with the president's expectations. So here on August 9th, so we're still less than 2 weeks after the July 25th call, or we're about 2 weeks. Sondland says in this message, to avoid misunderstandings, might be helpful to ask Andre for a draft statement, parentheses embargoed, so that we can see exactly what they propose to cover. Even though Z, referring to Zelensky, does a live presser, they can still summarize in a brief statement. Thoughts? And Volker says, agree. At his deposition, Ambassador Sondland said that he suggested reviewing a written summary of the statement because he was concerned that President Zelensky would say whatever he would say on live television and it still wouldn't be good enough for Rudy / the president, unquote. Yermak, in turn, was concerned that the announcement would still not result in the coveted White House meeting. On August 10th, Yermak texted Volker attempting to schedule a White House meeting before the Ukrainian president made a public statement in support of the investigations into Burisma and the 2016 election. So you can see what's going on here. The president and his agent, Giuliani, they want this public statement of the investigations before they'll give a date. And the Ukrainians want a date before they have to commit to making public they're going to do the investigations. And so you've had this standoff where each is trying to get the deliverable first. But there's no debate about what the deliverable is on either side. There's no debate about the quid pro quo here. You give me this, I'll give you that. You give me the White House meeting, I'll give you the public announcement of the investigation into your political rival. No. You give me the announcement of the investigation into my rival, and then I'll give you the meeting. The only debate here is about which comes first. So August 10th, Yermak texts Volker, I think it's possible to make this declaration and mention all these things which we discussed yesterday, but it will be logic to do after we receive a confirmation of date. We inform about date of visit, about our expectations, and our guarantees for future visit. Let's discuss it. Ambassador Volker responded that he agreed, but that first they would have to iron out a statement and use that to get a date, after which President Zelensky would give the statement. The two decided to have a call the next day and to include Ambassador Sondland. Yermak texts Ambassador Volker, excellent. Once we have a date, we will call for a press briefing announcing upcoming visit and outlining vision for the reboot of U.S.-Ukraine relationship, including, among other things, Burisma and election meddling in the investigations. Yermak was also in direct contact with Ambassador Sondland regarding this revised approach. In fact, he sent Ambassador Sondland the same text message. Ambassador Sondland kept the leadership of the State Department in the loop. On August 10th, he told Ambassador Volker that he had reported to T. Ulrich Breckbull, counselor of the Department of State, who Sondland testified frequently consulted with Secretary Pompeo. Sondland wrote to Volker, "I briefed Ulrich, all good." So Ulrich is in the loop. Sondland and Volker continued to pursue the statement from Zelensky on the investigations. The next day, Ambassador Sondland emails Breckbull and Lisa Kenna, the State Department's executive secretary, about efforts to secure a public statement and a big presser from President Zelensky. Sondland hoped it might, quote, make the boss happy enough to authorize an invitation. After first being evasive on the topic, Secretary Pompeo has subsequently acknowledged that he listened in on the July 25th call. Now, since he was on the call, Pompeo must have understood what would make the boss, that is the president, happy enough to schedule a White House meeting. Again, everyone was in the loop. On August 11th, Ambassador Volker sent Giuliani a text message. This is Volker to Giuliani. "Hi, Rudy. We have heard back from Andre again. They are writing the statement now and will send it to us. Can you talk for 5 minutes before noon today?" And Giuliani says, "Yes, just call." That's August 11th. On the next day, August 12th, Yermak sent Ambassador Volker an initial version of the draft statement by text. Notably, as we saw earlier, this statement from the Ukrainians doesn't explicitly mention Burisma, Biden, or 2016. Election investigations that the president has been seeking. So you can see what's going on here now. There was this game of chicken. You go first. No, we'll go first. You give us the date, we'll give you the statement. No, you give us the statement, we'll give you the date. And now, realizing, okay, they've got to give the statement first, Ukraine tries to give them a generic statement that doesn't really go into specifics about these investigations. And why? You can imagine why. Ukrainians don't want to have to go out in public and say they're going to do these investigations. Because they're not stupid. Because they understood this would pull them right into U.S. presidential politics. Because it was intended to. Which isn't in Ukraine's interest, it's not in our interest either. And Ukraine understood that. And so they resisted. First they resisted having to do the public statement, and then they wanted to make sure they'd get the deliverable. And then when they had to make the statement, they didn't want to be specific for one thing, for another thing. This is what Zelensky campaigned on. He was going to fight corruption. He was going to end political investigations. So he didn't want to be specific. So he sends the statement that doesn't have the specific references. And Ambassador Volker explained during his testimony that was not what Giuliani was requesting, and it would not satisfy Giuliani or Donald Trump. Now, presumably, if the president was interested in corruption, that statement would have been enough. But all he was interested in was an investigation or an announcement of an investigation into his rival and this debunked theory about 2016. Now, the conversation that Volker referred to in his earlier testimony took place on the morning of August 13th, when Giuliani made clear that the specific investigations related to Burisma, Code for Biden's, and the 2016 election had to be included in order to get the White House meeting. So the Americans sent back to the Ukrainian top aide a revised draft that includes now the two investigations, and you've seen the side by side. This was then the essence of the quid pro quo regarding the meeting, and this direction came from President Trump. Here is how Ambassador Sondland put it.
Mr. Giuliani's requests were a quid pro quo for arranging a White House visit for President Zelensky. Mr. Giuliani demanded that Ukraine make a public statement announcing the investigations of the 2016 election, DNC server, and Burisma. Mr. Giuliani was expressing the desires of the President of the United States, and we knew these investigations were important to the President.
Now, according to witness testimony, as you might imagine, Ukrainian officials were very uncomfortable with the draft that Giuliani, Volker, and Sondland were negotiated. They understood that the statement was the deliverable that President Trump wanted. But yielding to President Trump's demands would, in essence, force President Zelensky to break his promise to the Ukrainian people to root out corruption, because politically motivated investigations are a hallmark of the kind of corruption that Ukraine has been plagued with in the past. Mr. Yermak tried to get some confirmation that the requested investigations were legitimate. In response to the draft statement, Yermak asks Volker, quote, whether any request had ever been made by the U.S. to investigate election interference in 2016. In other words, whether any request had been made by any official U.S. law enforcement agency through formal channels, as you would expect if it were a legitimate request. Ambassador Volker tried to find a satisfactory answer. On August 15th, Volker's assistant asked Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent whether there was any precedent for such a request for investigations. At his deposition, Kent testified that, if you're asking me, have we ever gone to the Ukrainians and asked them to investigate or prosecute individuals for political reasons? The answer is, I hope we haven't, and we shouldn't, because that goes against everything that we are trying to promote in the post-Soviet states for the last 28 years, which is the promotion of the rule of law. The next day, we're now on August 16th. In a conversation with Ambassador Bill Taylor, the U.S. ambassador in Kyiv, and Ambassador Taylor stepped in when Ambassador Yovanovitch was pushed out, Taylor, quote, amplified the same theme and told Kent that, quote, Yermak was very uncomfortable with the idea of investigations and suggested it should be done officially and put in writing. As a result, it became clear to Kent in mid-August that Ukraine was being pressured to conduct politically motivated investigations. Kent told Ambassador Taylor, that's wrong, and we shouldn't be doing it as a matter of U.S. policy. Ambassador Volker claimed that he stopped pursuing the statement from the Ukrainians around this time because of the concerns raised by Zelensky's aide. At his deposition, and despite all of his efforts to secure a statement announcing these very specific political investigations desired by the president, Ambassador Volker testified that he agreed with Yermak's concerns and advised him that making those specific references was not a good idea because making those statements might look like it would play into our domestic politics. Without specific references to the politically damaging investigations that Trump demanded, the agreement just wouldn't work. Ukraine did not release the statement, and in turn, the White House meeting was not scheduled. As it turns out, Ambassador Sondland and Volker did not achieve the breakthrough after all. Now let's go into what finally breaks the logjam, because that involves the military aid. With efforts to trade a White House meeting for a press statement announcing the investigations temporarily scuttled, Sondland and Volker go back to the drawing board. On August 19th, Ambassador Sondland told Volker that he drove the larger issue home with Yermak, President Zelensky's top aide, particularly that this was now bigger than a White House meeting, bigger than just a White House meeting, and was about the relationship per se. The relationship per se, not just about the meeting anymore. It's about everything. It's about everything. By this time in late August, the hold and security assistance had been in place for more than a month, and there was still no credible explanation offered by the White House, despite some, like Ambassador Sondland, repeatedly asking. There were no interagency meetings since July 31st, and the Defense Department had withdrawn its assurances that it could even comply with the law, which indeed it couldn't. Every agency in the administration opposed the hold. As the Government Accountability Office confirmed, concerned DOD and OMB officials had been right that the president's holding of the aid was an unlawful act. But President Trump was not budging. At the same time, despite the persistent efforts of numerous people, President Trump refused to schedule the coveted White House visit for President Zelensky until the investigations were announced that would benefit his campaign. Here is what Ambassador Sondland said about the hold on funds and its link to the politically motivated investigations in Ukraine.
In the absence of any credible explanation for the suspension of aid, I later came to believe that the resumption of security aid would not occur until there was a public statement from Ukraine committing to the investigations of the 2016 elections and Burisma, as Mr. Giuliani had demanded.
From the embassy in Kyiv, David Holmes reached the same conclusion, a conclusion as simple as 2 + 2 = 4.
Mr. Holmes, you have testified that by late August, you had a clear impression that the security assistance hold was somehow connected to the investigations that President Trump wanted. How did you conclude that? How did you reach that clear conclusion?
Sir, we've been hearing about the investigation since March, months before, and we've been. President Zelensky had received a congratulatory letter from the president saying he'd be pleased to meet him following his inauguration in May. And we hadn't been able to get that meeting, and then the security hold came up with no explanation. And I'd be surprised if any of the Ukrainians, you said earlier, we discussed earlier, sophisticated people, when they received no explanation for why that hold was in place, they wouldn't have drawn that conclusion.
Because the investigations were still being pursued?
Correct.
And the hold was still remaining without explanation?
Correct.
So this, to you, was the only logical conclusion that you could reach?
Correct.
Sort of like 2 + 2 = 4?
Exactly.
Sondland explained the predicament he believed he faced with a hold on aid to Ukraine.
As my other State Department colleagues have testified, this security aid was critical to Ukraine's defense and should not have been delayed. I expressed this view to many during this period, but my goal at the time was to do what was necessary to get the aid released, to break the logjam. I believe that the public statement we had been discussing for weeks was essential to advancing that goal. I really regret that the Ukrainians were placed in that predicament, but I do not regret doing what I could to try to break the logjam and to solve the problem.
On August 22nd, Ambassador Sondland tried to break that logjam, as he put it, regarding both the security assistance hold and the White House meeting. Ambassador Sondland described those efforts in his public testimony. Let's listen to him again.
In preparation for the September 1 Warsaw meeting, I asked Secretary Pompeo whether a face-to-face conversation between Trump and Zelensky would help to break the logjam.
All right, let's pause briefly just to check back in and see what's going on. We are on impeachment trial day 3, part 2, we are calling this. Adam Schiff said at about 7:10 that they have about 2.5 hours to go of presentations, as he called them tonight, meaning this will end somewhere between 9:30 and 10 p.m. I want to get to a few super chats that are coming in. There are going to be dozens and dozens of hours, so I hope you'll indulge me if we see what's on your mind a little bit rather than just listening and watching to this endlessly. So I'll catch up on super chats momentarily. Let me say a few thank yous. Stuart Lotspeich is a new David Pakman Show member, number 101. Carl Weigel is new member number 102. And Eric Sporborg is new member number 103. We are at 103 out of our target of 123 new members. The coupon code is impeach50, and joinpacman.com is the place to sign up. Let me get caught up on Super Chats here and see where exactly I left off. Okay, Hannah Laura Clemenson says, David, I just made it home through a blizzard. Am I the 100th new member? No, Hannah Laura, the memberships, the 100th new member happened about a half hour before you said that, and the memberships are at joinpacman.com. So unfortunately, you're not new member number 100. John McKinney says, Alan Lichtman claims that Democrats shouldn't worry about unity. He claims it only counts for the party controlling the White House. Democrats don't control the White House. What do you think? Yeah, I've interviewed Alan Lichtman. With everything Alan Lichtman says, my view tends to be he's sort of right, but if you go fully to what he says to its full conclusion, you often end up with things that don't pass the sniff test, but he's always sort of right. And we'll talk about the unity issue maybe tomorrow or even on the Friday show. Hannah Clemenson also adds pronunciation guide. Honolulu, Lulu replaced with Laura. Hannah. Okay, all right. Well, I think I did that correctly. I appreciate it very much. Super chats are the $sign at the bottom of the chat window if you're watching on a desktop computer, over the video window if you're watching on mobile. You click it, you send your message, and then it'll pop up right over there. I will get back to, I will do more super chats momentarily, and let's get back to what Adam Schiff's presentation, as he calls it.
What would favorably impress Donald Trump? Would Donald Trump be favorably impressed if President Zelensky were to tell him about this new corruption court or new legislation in the Rada, or how negotiations with the Russians were going, or how they're bringing about defense reform? Had any of those things ever come up in any of these text messages, any of these emails, any of these phone calls, any of these conversations? Of course not. Of course not. There was only one thing that was going to favorably impress President Trump in Warsaw, and that is if Zelensky told him to his face, I'm going to do these political investigations. I don't want to do them. You know I don't want to do them. I've resisted doing them, but I'm at war with Russia, and I can't wait anymore. I can't wait anymore. I'm sure that would have impressed Donald Trump. But the meeting between the two presidents never happened in Warsaw. President Trump canceled the trip at the last moment. Before Bolton left Kyiv, Ambassador Taylor asked for a private meeting. Ambassador Taylor explained that he was extremely concerned about the hold on security assistance. He described the meeting to us during his testimony.
Near the end of Ambassador Bolton's visit, I asked to meet him privately, during which I expressed to him my serious concern about the withholding of military assistance to Ukraine while the Ukrainians were defending their country from Russian aggression.
I want to let you guys know that it's being widely reported that during Adam Schiff's earlier presentation, 21 Republicans weren't even in the Senate chamber. Now, we've been joking about the rules. They're allowed water and milk and nothing else. Are flavored milks allowed? We've been joking around. 21 of the 53 Republicans missed large portions of Adam Schiff's earlier testimony. The rules say they are supposed to be there. They are supposed to be adjudicating the fate of the President of the United States, and they were missing. 40%, 39% of Republicans were missing for huge portions of this. Of course, it's a foregone conclusion that they're going to vote to acquit. We know that. But can't they at least pretend to be doing what they're supposed to be doing? 40% of Republicans missed a huge portion of the presentation. How will they now decide whether to acquit or convict? Oh, right. It never mattered. They were always going to vote to acquit.
From the State Department. If you'd like to know what John Bolton had in mind when he thought that Zelensky could favorably impress the president in Warsaw, we can find that out too, just for the asking, and a document called a subpoena. So Taylor sends that cable August 29th. The State Department.
Speaking of which, and if people want to just see the stream and nothing else, there's a million streams where you can see that. People have been noticing that we barely get a shot of what's going on in the Senate. We have this shot, which is just the close-up of the speaker, the person speaking. I want to be clear, because speaker could mean something else. And then there's a more zoomed out shot where you see Justice John Roberts and sort of the people at the front and the Democratic and Republican desks. C-SPAN is not controlling the cameras, as far as we recently heard. C-SPAN asked Mitch McConnell to control the cameras. They have plenty of cameras. We could get a much more nuanced and varied production of this. Mitch McConnell is the Senate, the Senate Majority Leader is controlling the cameras. And we would notice that there's empty seats if they actually allowed C-SPAN to control the cameras. And so that's why it took a reporter in the room to tweet for us to learn that 21 Republican senators were gone during Adam Schiff's earlier test. It's all, I mean, it's a vicious circle of quid pro quo, you scratch my back, status quo nonsense. Rigged, I guess, is just the right word. Rigged kind of encompasses all of it.
If it matters to us, we should care about the fact that in 1994, when we asked them to give up their nuclear weapons that they had inherited from the Soviet Union, and they didn't want to give them up, and we were worried about proliferation, we said, hey, if you give them up, which you don't want to do because you're worried the Russians might invade, if you give them up, we will help assure your territorial integrity. We made that commitment. I hope we care about that. I hope we care about that because they did give them up. And you know what? Just what they feared took place. The Russians moved across their border, and they remain occupying part of Ukraine. That's the word of America we gave. And we're breaking that word. Why? For help with a political campaign? Ambassador Taylor was exactly right. That's crazy. It's worse than crazy. It's repulsive. It's repugnant. It breaks our word. And to do it in the name of these corrupt investigations is also contrary to everything we espouse around the world. I used to be part of a commission in the House on democracy assistance, where we would meet with parliamentarians, and I know my Senate colleagues do much the same thing. And we would urge our colleagues to observe the rule of law, not to engage in political investigations and prosecutions. I don't know how we make that argument now. I don't know how we look our allies or these burgeoning democracies in the face, our fellow parliamentarians, and make that argument now. How do we make that argument now? Now, testimony indicated that Secretary Pompeo eventually carried that cable into the White House. But there's no evidence that those national security concerns that they don't want you to see were able to outweigh the president's personal interest in his getting foreign help in his reelection campaign. There's no evidence at all. Now we get to August 28th. Politico was the first to publicly report that President Trump had implemented a hold on nearly $400 million of U.S. military assistance to Ukraine that had been appropriated by Congress. Now that the worst-kept secret was public, Ukrainian officials immediately expressed their alarm and concern to their American counterparts. As witnesses explained, the Ukrainians had two serious concerns. One, of course, was the aid itself, which was vital to their ability to fight off Russia. But in addition, they were worried about the symbolism of the hold, that it signaled to Russia and Vladimir Putin that the United States was wavering in its support for Ukraine. Witnesses testified that this was a division that Russia could and would exploit to drive further wedge between the United States and Ukraine to its advantage. This second concern was likely why Ukrainian officials had wanted the hold to remain a secret in the first place, because it would add to the negative impact to Ukraine if the hold itself became public. It was bad enough that the President of the United States put a hold on their aid. it was going to be far worse if it became public, as indeed it did. Andrei Yermak, the same Zelensky aide, sent Ambassador Volker a link to the Politico story, and then texted, "Need to talk with you." Other Ukrainian officials also expressed concerns to Ambassador Volker that the Ukrainian government was being singled out and penalized for some reason. Well, what do we think that reason was? Why were they being singled out? Why was that country be singled out? That was the one country that this president could lever for help against an opponent he feared. That's why Ukraine was being singled out.
Lever, I like that, versus
On August
lever.
29th, Yermak also contacted Ambassador Taylor. Yermak said the Ukrainians were very concerned about the hold of military assistance. He said that he and other Ukrainian officials would be willing to travel to Washington to explain to U.S. officials the importance of this assistance. Ambassador Taylor, who was on the ground in Ukraine, explained the Ukrainian viewpoint and, frankly, their desperation.
In September, the Minister of Defense, for example, came to me, I would use the word desperate, to figure out why the assistance was being held. He thought that perhaps if he went to Washington to talk to you, to talk to the Secretary of Defense, to talk to the President, he would be able to find out and reassure, provide whatever answer was necessary to have that assistance released.
Without any official explanation for the hold, American officials could provide little reassurance to their Ukrainian counterparts. It has been publicly reported that President Trump, Secretary Esper, and Secretary Pompeo met in late August and that they all implored the president to release the aid. But President Trump continued to refuse to release the aid. As of August 30th, the president was clearly directing OMB to continue the hold on security assistance. In documents reviewed by Just Security but withheld from the Congress by OMB on the president's instructions, OMB official Michael Duffy emailed DOD Controller Elaine McCusker that there is, quote, clear direction from POTUS to continue the hold. So here we are, August 30th. A month after that July 25th call, aid still being withheld. Ukrainians still holding on, still not willing to capitulate, not willing to violate Zelensky's whole campaign pledge about not engaging in corrupt investigations. That same day, August 30th, Republican Senator Ron Johnson spoke with Ambassador Sondland to express his concern about President Trump's decision to withhold military assistance to Ukraine. Senator Johnson described that call in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. According to Senator Johnson, Ambassador Sondland told him that if Ukraine would commit to, quote, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, if President Trump has that confidence, then he'll release the military spending. Senator Johnson added, at that suggestion, I winced. My reaction was, oh God, I don't want to see those two things combined. The next day, August 31st, Senator Johnson spoke by phone with President Trump regarding the decision to withhold aid to Ukraine. According to the Wall Street Journal, President Trump denied the quid pro quo that Senator Johnson had learned of from Ambassador Sondland. At the same time, however, President Trump refused to authorize Senator Johnson to tell Ukrainian officials on his upcoming trip to Kyiv that the aid would be forthcoming. The message that Ambassador Sondland communicated to Senator Johnson mirrored that used by President Trump during the July 25th call with President Zelensky, in which President Trump twice asked the Ukrainian leader to get to the bottom of it, including in connection to an investigation into the debunked conspiracy theory of Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. It also mirrored the language of the text message that Ambassador Volker sent to President Zelensky's aide just before the July 25th call. Indeed, despite the president's self-serving denials, the message was clear. President Trump wanted the investigations, and he would withhold not one, but two acts vested in him by the power of his office in order to get them. Now begins September. September 1st. president was supposed to go to Warsaw, as we know, but he doesn't go to Warsaw. Mike Pence goes to Warsaw. Jennifer Williams, special advisor to the vice president for Europe and Russia, learned of the change in the president's travel plans on August 29th. The vice president's national security advisor asked, at the request of Vice President Pence, for an update on the status of the security assistance that had just been publicly revealed in Politico and would be a critical issue during the bilateral meeting between the vice president and President Zelensky in Warsaw. The delegation arrives in Warsaw and gathers in a hotel room to brief Vice President Pence before he met with the Ukrainian president. National Security Advisor Bolton led the meeting. As Williams described it, advisors in the room, quote, agreed on the need to get a final decision on security assistance as soon as possible so that it could be implemented before the end of the year. But Vice President Pence did not have authority from the president to release the aid. Ambassador Sondland also attended that briefing. At the end of it, he expressed concern directly to Vice President Pence about the security assistance being held until the Ukrainians announced the very same politically motivated investigations at the heart of the scheme. Now, you mentioned that you also had a conversation with Vice President Pence before his meeting with President Zelensky in Warsaw, and that you raised the concern you had as well that the security assistance was being withheld because of the president's desire to get a commitment from Zelensky to pursue these political investigations.
It's quite interesting to see a skilled orator like Adam Schiff take pieces of the House interviews, testimony, I guess we would call it, and then weave it together to tell the story now in the Senate for the Senate. Let's just take a brief pause from what's going on. We will get back to it. I promise you, you won't miss anything that will inform the eventual outcome of these proceedings, if you understand what I mean. John McKinney sent a super chat saying, if Republicans lose in November of 2020, will Republicans blame Donald Trump for their losses? Well, if Trump loses and Republicans lose, there will be many opportunistic Republicans who will blame Trump for their losses. If Republicans lose and Trump doesn't, you may see the people that lose blame Trump, but the Republican Party, for as long as Donald Trump is the president, is not going to blame the president. You can be absolutely assured of that. I'll continue to take super chats as they come in. I don't know if there's going to be another break before the end of this. Adam Schiff saying a little while ago that they had about 2.5 hours to go, which puts us somewhere between 9:30 and 10 p.m. Eastern time. And it remains a question whether there will be another break or not. We also are up to 103 of our goal of 123 new members. Anybody using that code up there, Impeach50, when you sign up at joinpacman.com, you will literally move this blue bar across the screen. And I will also thank you live, which is very exciting for some people, I must say.
The Warsaw meeting with Vice President Pence, Ambassador Sondland quickly pulled aside Andrei Yermak, Zelensky's top aide, and informed him that the aid would not be forthcoming until Ukraine publicly announced the 2 investigations that President Trump wanted. So here we are. After the meeting, right after the meeting, they're still in Warsaw, and Zelensky pulls aside his Ukrainian counterpart, Yermak, and explains the aid is not coming until the investigations are announced.
Based on my previous communication with Secretary Pompeo, I felt comfortable sharing my concerns with Mr. Yermak. It was a very, very brief pull-aside conversation that happened within a few seconds. I told Mr. Yermak that I believed that the resumption of U.S. aid would likely not occur until Ukraine took some kind of action on the public statement that we had been discussing for many weeks.
I mean, let's let that sink in for a minute, too. You've heard my colleagues at the other table say, Ukrainians felt no pressure. There's no evidence they felt any pressure. Of course, we've already had testimony about how they did feel pressure and they didn't want to be drawn into this political campaign. And you saw over and over in these text messages and emails, no, you go first. You announce, no, you go first. And we're supposed to believe they felt no pressure. And there it is. It breaks out in the open. The military aid is being withheld, and there's a connection between the holding of the military aid and these investigations. And the first thing they're asking about, they send the copy of the article, what's happening with this aid? They're ready to come to D.C. to plead for the aid. They go to Warsaw, they meet with the vice president. It's the first question is the aid. And what happens after that meeting? Now, that's a big meeting, by the way, with the vice president, the Ukrainian delegation. It's not like in front of all those people, the vice president is going to bring it up. And so Sondland goes up to his counterpart right after that on the sidelines of that meeting, and he says, basically, you ain't getting the money until you do the investigations. And we're to believe they felt no pressure? Folks, they're at war. They're at war, and they're being told you're not getting $400 million in aid you need unless you do what the president wants, and what the president wants are these 2 investigations. If you don't believe that's pressure, that's $400 million worth of pressure. I got a bridge I want to sell you. It's hard for us to put ourselves in the Ukrainians' position. I mean, imagine the eastern third of our country were occupied by an enemy force. And we're beholden to another country for military aid. And they're saying you're not going to get it until you do what we want. Do you think we'd feel pressured? I think we'd feel pressured. And that's exactly the situation the Ukrainians were in now. You've heard the other counsel say before, well, but they say they don't feel pressure. Like they're going to admit they were being shaken down by the President of the United States. You think they feel pressure now? You should see what kind of pressure they feel if they admitted that. Tim Morrison, the NSC official, witnessed the conversation between Sondland and Yermak from across the room, and immediately thereafter received a summary from Ambassador Sondland. He reported the substance of that conversation to his boss, Ambassador Bolton, who told Morrison to consult with the lawyers. Go talk to the lawyers. You know, if you keep getting told you got to go talk to the lawyers, there's a problem. If things are perfect, you don't get told, go talk to the lawyers time and time again. Morrison confirmed that he did talk to the lawyers, in part to ensure there was a record of what Ambassador Sondland was doing. That record exists within the White House. Would you like me to read you that record? I'd be happy to read you that record. It's there for your asking. Of course, the president has refused to provide that record. Precisely why did Ambassador Bolton direct Morrison to tell the lawyers, to talk to the lawyers? Would you like Ambassador Bolton to tell you why he said that? He'd be happy to tell you why he said that. He's there for your asking. What did Bolton know about the freeze in aid prior to this meeting in Warsaw? What did he mean that if he can press Zelensky, it's going to depend on whether he can press Zelensky? Would you like to know what that meant? I'd like to know what he meant by that. I think we know what he meant by that. Tim Morrison also conveyed the substance of the Sondland-Yermak pull-aside to his colleague, Ambassador Taylor. So this is now Tim Morrison, told by Bolton, go talk to the lawyers, and he talks to also Ambassador Taylor, our ambassador in Ukraine.
On the evening of September 1st, I received a readout of the Pence-Zelensky meeting over the phone from Mr. Morrison, during which he told me that President Zelensky had opened the meeting by immediately asking Vice President about the security cooperation. The Vice President did not respond substantively, but said that he would talk to President Trump that night. The Vice President did say that President Trump wanted the Europeans to do more to support Ukraine, and that he wanted the Ukrainians to do more to fight corruption. During the same phone call with Mr. Morrison, he described a conversation Ambassador Sondland had with Mr. Yermak in Warsaw. Ambassador Sondland told Mr. Yermak that the security assistance money would not come until President Zelensky committed to pursue the Burisma investigation. I was alarmed by what Mr. Morrison told me about the Sondland-Yermak conversation.
Ambassador Taylor then explained why he was so alarmed by this turn. Let's hear that as well.
You said previously that you were alarmed to learn this. Why were you alarmed?
It's one thing to try to leverage a meeting in the White House. It's another thing, I thought, to leverage security assistance to a country at war, dependent on both the security assistance and the demonstration of support. It was much more alarming. The White House meeting was one thing, security assistance was much more alarming.
Upon learning from Mr. Morrison that the military aid may be conditioned on Ukraine publicly announcing these two investigations, Ambassador Taylor sends an urgent text message to Ambassador Sondland asking, are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations? And the response by Ambassador Sondland, call me. Well, you know what that means, right? You get a text message that's putting it in black and white. Are we saying security assistance and the White House meeting are conditioned on investigations? Call me. In other words, don't put this in writing. Call me. Ambassador Taylor did in fact call Sondland. Informed by notes he took at the time of the call, he summarized that conversation as follows.
During that phone call, Ambassador Sondland told me that President Trump had told him that he wants President Zelensky to state publicly that Ukraine will investigate Burisma and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. Ambassador Sondland also told me that he now recognized that he had made a mistake by earlier telling Ukrainian officials that only a White House meeting with President Zelensky was dependent on a public announcement of the investigations. In fact, Ambassador Sondland said, everything was dependent on such an announcement, including security assistance. He said that President Trump wanted President Zelensky in a public box by making a public statement about ordering such investigations.
Ambassador Taylor testified that his contemporaneous notes of the call reflect that Sondland used the phrase public box to describe President Trump's desire to ensure that the initiation of his desired investigations was announced publicly. A private commitment was not good enough. The State Department has Ambassador Taylor's extensive notes, and of course, we would like to show them to you to corroborate his testimony. But pursuant to the President's instructions, the State Department will not turn them over. You might recall from the tape yesterday, Ambassador Taylor said, they'll be shortly coming, I'm told. Well, somebody countermanded that instructions. Who do we think that was? But you should see them. If you have any question about what Sondland told Ambassador Taylor, if the President's counsel tries to create any confusion about what Sondland told Taylor about his conversation with the President, and look, Sondland had one recollection in his deposition and another recollection in the first hearing and another recollection in the declaration. You want to know exactly what happened in that conversation when it was fresh in Sondland's mind and he told Taylor about it and Taylor wrote it in its notes. You're going to want Taylor's notes. In any courtroom in America holding a fair trial, you would want to see contemporaneous notes. This Senate should be no different. Demand those notes. Demand to see the truth. We're not afraid of those notes. We haven't seen them. We haven't seen them. Maybe those notes say something completely different. Maybe those notes say no quid pro quo. Maybe those notes say it's a perfect call. I'd like to see them. I'm willing to trust Ambassador Taylor's testimony and his recollection. I'd like to see them. I'd like to show them to you. They're yours for the asking. On September 25th, the Washington Post editorial board reported concerns that President Trump was withholding military assistance for Ukraine and a White House meeting in order to force President Zelensky to announce investigations of Vice President Biden and purported Ukrainian interference in the U.S. election. The Post editorial board wrote, "We're reliably told that the president has a second and more venal agenda. He is attempting to force Mr. Zelensky to intervene in the 2020 presidential election by launching an investigation of the leading Democratic candidate, Joe Biden. Mr. Trump is not just soliciting Ukraine's help with his presidential campaign. He is using U.S. military aid the country desperately needs in an attempt to extort it." So that's September 25th. President on notice, scheme discovered. September 5th. September 7th, the evidence shows President Trump has a call with Ambassador Sondland, where the president made the corrupt bargain for military aid in the White House meeting even more explicit. On September 7th, Ambassador Sondland spoke to President Trump on the telephone. After that conversation, Ambassador Sondland called Tim Morrison to update him on that conversation. Unlike Sondland, who testified that he never took notes, Morrison took notes of the conversation and recalled it during his public testimony. Let's listen.
Now, a few days later, on September 7th, you spoke again to Ambassador Sondland, who told you that he had just gotten off the phone with President Trump. Isn't that right?
That sounds correct, yes.
What did Ambassador Sondland tell you that President Trump said to him?
If I recall this conversation correctly, this was where Ambassador Sondland related that there was no quid pro quo, but President Zelensky had to make the statement and that he had to want to do it.
And by that point, did you understand that the statement related to the Biden and 2016 investigations?
I think I did, yes.
And that was essentially a condition for the security assistance to be released?
I understood that that's what Ambassador Sondland believed.
After speaking with President Trump?
That's what he represented.
Now, you should bear in mind when Mr. Morrison says that's what he represented, that we asked Mr. Morrison about the president's calls with Ambassador Sondland, and he testified that every time he checked to see did Ambassador Sondland in fact talk with the president, when he said that he did, that yes, in fact, he talked with the president. Every time he checked, he was able to confirm it. Now, let's let this sink in for a minute. According to Mr. Morrison's testimony, former Republican staffer on the Armed Services Committee, he speaks with Sondland on September 7th, and Sondland says he's just gotten off the phone with Trump. Okay, so this is contemporaneous. Just got off the phone. Call is fresh in everybody's mind. And what was said? Morrison says, Ambassador Sondland related there was no quid pro quo, but President Zelensky had to make the statement, and he had to want to do it. No quid pro quo, but there's a quid pro quo. Now, there are notes.
Let me address some super chats that are coming in. Good questions, all of them. Eileen Burke says, any thoughts on Trump's basic admission in Davos that he was obstructing justice by them having all the materials and the Democrats don't have them? Yeah, already have been researching that story for tomorrow's show. Eileen, Trump said that everything's going fine because he has all the materials and the Democrats don't have the materials, which implies that they are withholding evidence, which is an obstruction of Congress, which is something he's already been impeached for. The upside to that, of course, is I guess he's already being impeached for obstruction of Congress, and therefore you can't be impeached for that again. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. Fake Christians for Trump says, can I please get proof that Republicans weren't there? Okay, check my Twitter. I'm D. Packman on Twitter. The reporter who was in the room, M. McAuliffe, I forget what M stands for, I retweeted his tweet. He said 21 Republicans are missing. And, you know, as I said earlier, if you are going to be deciding on Trump's guilt or innocence, don't you sort of have to be there for this stuff? I guess not if your plan all along was just to vote to acquit Donald Trump, which is, of course, indeed what Republicans are planning to do. So, yeah, check out, I tweeted it, and you can, the reporter was in the room. It's a primary source. I'm D. Packman on Twitter, which, by the way, you should be following me on Twitter. Got some pretty good takes about apples on there if you check them out. Keep the super chats coming. I'll keep popping in and answering them, and let's get back to Adam Schiff's narrative here.
This September 7th conversation, and guess what Ambassador Bolton said? I think you could probably figure this out by now. Go talk to the lawyers. Go talk to the lawyers. And yet again, for the third time, Morrison went to talk to the lawyers about this conversation with Ambassador Sondland. Morrison also called Ambassador Taylor to inform him about the conversation, and we have the testimony from Ambassador Taylor about their conversation, which is also based on his contemporaneous notes. Let's look at the conversation now between Mr. Morrison and Ambassador Taylor.
According to Mr. Morrison, President Trump told Ambassador Sondland he was not asking for a quid pro quo. But President Trump did insist that President Zelensky go to a microphone and say he is opening investigations of Biden and 2016 election interference, and that President Zelensky should want to do this himself.
Okay, so here we have two witnesses taking contemporaneous notes, both reflecting the same conversation. Conversation between Sondland and the president, in which the president says no quid pro quo, but quid pro quo. There are documents that prove this. Documents that prove this, that are yours for the asking.
For people speculating in the chat that Tulsi is missing from this hearing, she's a member of the House, not the Senate. So she wouldn't be here. She has no part in what's going on here.
Whom he spoke to after President Trump. Guys, multiple conversations with Z, meaning Zelensky, POTUS, let's talk. Sondland spoke to Taylor, but not Volker shortly after this text. According to Ambassador Taylor, who testified again on his real-time notes, let's hear what he said.
The following day, on September 8th, Ambassador Sondland and I spoke on the phone. He confirmed that he had talked to President Trump, as I had suggested a week earlier, but that President Trump was adamant that President Zelensky himself had to clear things up and do it in public. President Trump said it was not a quid pro quo.
So it's all very consistent here. What the president said, no quid pro quo, but Zelensky must announce the investigations publicly, was what he was telling Sondland. No quid pro quo except for the quid pro quo. The president's attorneys rely on the first half of that sentence and would like you to forget the second half ever happened. But we don't have to leave our common sense at the door. We don't have to rely on an incomplete description of that call. We have instead the detailed notes of Mr. Morrison and Ambassador Taylor. But we also know what President Trump told Sondland because Sondland relayed that message to President Zelensky. During the same September 8 conversation with Taylor, Sondland described his conversation with President Zelensky. Here's Ambassador Taylor's account of it.
Ambassador Sondland also said that he had talked to President Zelensky and Mr. Yermak and had told them that although this was not a quid pro quo, if President Zelensky did not clear things up in public, we would be at a stalemate. I understood a stalemate to mean that Ukraine would not receive the much-needed military assistance. Ambassador Sondland said that this conversation concluded with President Zelensky agreeing to make a public statement in an interview on CNN.
So not only did Ambassador Sondland relate this conversation to Mr. Morrison and Mr. Taylor, not only did Ambassador Taylor, Mr. Morrison talk about it, but Sondland confirms that he's relayed this conversation to Zelensky himself. Everyone was now in the loop on the military aid being withheld for the political investigations.
Good question via Super Chat from Rolf Ganger, who says, aren't senators required to be present? Yeah, so for an impeachment proceeding to be valid, 2/3 of the senators need to be present in total. But the thing is, the definition of present seems to be at issue. As long as you've checked in for the day, if you walk out and it's not being monitored, if it's not being controlled, I think you still count as present as far as that rule is concerned. And again, it's up to the Chief Justice, John Roberts, to actually enforce that. So good luck with that. And it's just incredible. It's incredible what it is that's going on here.
Ukrainians did not owe President Trump anything.
Ambassador Taylor testified that at the end of the Sondland-Zelensky conversation, President Zelensky said that he had relented and agreed to do a CNN interview to announce the investigations. So there was a breakthrough after all. The promised meeting wasn't enough. The withheld security assistance broke the logjam. Zelensky was going to go on CNN and announce the investigations. Taylor, though, remained concerned that even if the Ukrainian leader did as President Trump required, President Trump might continue to withhold the vital U.S. security assistance in any event. Ambassador Taylor texted his concerns to Ambassador Volker and Sondland, stating, "The nightmare is they give the interview and don't get the security assistance. The Russians love it, and I quit." I mean, that's quite telling, too. What's Ambassador Taylor worried about? He's worried the Ukrainians are finally going to agree to do it. They're going to make the announcement, and they're still going to get stiffed on the aid. At his deposition, Ambassador Taylor elaborated, the nightmare is the scenario where President Zelensky goes out in public, makes an announcement that he's going to investigate Burisma and the interference in the 2016 election. Maybe, among other things, he might put that in some series of investigations, but the nightmare was he would mention those two, take all the heat from that, get himself in big trouble in this country, meaning Ukraine, or this country, meaning the United States, and probably in this country as well, meaning both, I guess, and the security assistance would not be released. That was the nightmare. If it were to happen, Taylor's testified he would quit. Early in the morning in Europe on September 9th, which was 12:47 a.m. in Washington, D.C., Ambassador Taylor reiterated his concerns about the president's quid pro quo for security assistance in another series of text messages with Ambassadors Volker and Sondland. So here are the September 9th text messages. Taylor texts to Sondland, the message to the Ukrainians, parentheses, and Russians, we send with a decision on security assistance is key. With the hold, we have already shaken their faith in us. Thus, my nightmare scenario. And Taylor goes on and says, counting on you to be right about this interview, Gordon, meaning if they do it, you darn well better come through with the military aid. And Sondland says, Bill, I never said I was right. I said we are where we are and believe we have identified the best pathway forward. Let's hope it works. And Taylor said, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. Ambassador Taylor testified about what he meant. He said that to withhold that assistance for no good reason other than help with a political campaign made no sense. It was counterproductive to all of what we've been trying to do. It was illogical. It could not be explained. It was crazy. In response to Ambassador Taylor's text message, Sondland replies at about 5 a.m. in Washington. So the message from Taylor goes out at 12:47 a.m. The message back from Sondland comes at 5 a.m. So it looks like it may be 5 hours later. So Taylor has texted at 12:47 a.m. As I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. There he is again, putting it in writing, for crying out loud. Hadn't Sondland said to call him about this stuff? And so 5 hours later, you get this really interesting message from Sondland. Bill, I believe you're incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear. No quid pro quos of any kind. The president is trying to evaluate whether Ukraine is truly going to adopt the transparency and reforms that President Zelensky promised during his campaign. I suggest we stop the back and forth by text. In other words, can you please stop putting this in writing? Congress may read this one day. If you still have concerns, I recommend you give Lisa Kenna or S a call to discuss them directly. Thanks. Now, as you can see, Ambassador Sondland's subsequent testimony revealed that this text and other denials of a quid pro quo were intentionally false and simply designed to provide a written record of a false explanation that could later be used to conceal wrongdoing. The text message says there were no quid pro quos of any kind, but you've seen his testimony. He swore under oath. He was crystal clear when he said there was a quid pro quo for the White House meeting, and he subsequently testified there was a quid pro quo for the security assistance as well, as confirmed by President Trump's direction to him on September 7th. Sondland's recollection of his conversation with President Trump, as I mentioned, has evolved over time. Initially, in his deposition, he testified that the conversation with the president occurred between Taylor's text of September 9th at 12:47 Washington time and his response at 5 a.m. He recalled very little of the conversation at that time other than his belief that his text message reflected President Trump's response. Subsequently, though, and again, this is one of the reasons why you do depositions in closed session. Subsequently, after the opening statements of the testimony of Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Morrison were released, which described in overlapping and painful detail Sondland's conversation with President Trump on September 7th, Ambassador Sondland submitted an addendum to his deposition testimony, which in relevant parts said this. Finally, as of this writing, I cannot specifically recall if I had one or two phone calls with President Trump in the September 6 to 9 timeframe. Despite repeated requests to the White House and the State Department, I have not been granted access to all of the phone records, and I would like to review those phone records along with any other notes and other documents that may exist to determine if I can provide a more complete testimony to assist Congress. However, although I have no specific recollection of phone calls during this period with Mr. Taylor, Ambassador Taylor, Mr. Morrison, I have no reason to question the substance of their recollection about my September 1 conversation with Mr. Yermak. During his public testimony, Ambassador Sondland purported to remember more of this conversation with President Trump. Although he still couldn't, or maintained he couldn't remember if it was on September 7th or September 9th. And according to his testimony, President Trump did not specifically say there was a quid pro quo. But when Sondland simply asked the president what he wanted from Ukraine, President Trump immediately brought up a quid pro quo. According to Sondland, President Trump said, I want nothing, I want no quid pro quo, I want Zelensky to do the right thing. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, I want him to do what he ran on. In his subsequent testimony, Ambassador Sondland explained that President Trump's reference to what he ran on was a nod to rooting out corruption. Here, however, corruption like Burisma has become code for the investigations that President Trump has sought. So you've got Ambassador Sondland's emerging recollection. But what you've got is actually written notes taken at the time that he does not contest. Written notes of Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Morrison. Notes which I believe will reflect quite clearly the understanding of dirt for dollars that was confirmed by this telephone call with President Trump.
Well, you weren't dissuaded then, right? Because you still thought that the aid was conditioned on the public announcement of the investigations after speaking to President Trump.
By September 8th, I was absolutely convinced it was.
And President Trump did not dissuade you of that in the conversation that you acknowledged you had with him.
I don't ever recall, because that would have changed my entire calculus. If President Trump had told me directly, I'm not
That's not what I'm asking, Ambassador Sondland. I'm just saying, you still believed that the security assistance was conditioned on the investigation after you spoke to President Trump. Yes or no?
From a time frame standpoint, yes.
Okay, so here we have Sondland saying that whatever his recollection may be about that call, he was still very clear what the president wanted, and he was very clear there was a quid pro quo. That is consistent, obviously, with what Mr. Morrison has had to say and Ambassador Taylor. In other words, he didn't believe President Trump's denial of a quid pro quo, and neither should you. Sondland's understanding was further confirmed by President Trump's own chief of staff, On October 17, at a press briefing in the White House, Mick Mulvaney admitted that President Trump withheld the essential military aid for Ukraine as leverage to pressure Ukraine to investigate the conspiracy theory that Ukraine had interfered in the 2016 election.
So those were the driving factors. Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely, no question about that. But that's it, and that's why we held up the money.
When pressed that he had just convinced of the very quid pro quo that President Trump had been denying, Mulvaney doubled down. Let's listen to that.
But to be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo. It is funding will not flow unless the investigation into the Democratic server happened as well.
We do that all the time with foreign policy.
This evidence demonstrates that President Trump withheld the security assistance in the White House meeting with President Zelensky until Ukraine made a public statement announcing the two investigations targeted to help his political re-election efforts. But as you will learn next, he got caught, and the cover-up ensued.
Mr. Chief Justice and Senators, thank you for your patience. This is a lot of information, but you have a very important obligation, and that is ultimately to decide whether the president committed impeachable offenses. And in order to make that judgment, you have to have all of the facts. And so we're going through this chronology. We're close to being done. But it's important to know that while all of this material was going on, these deals were being made, there were other forces at work. Even before the president's freeze on U.S. military assistance to Ukraine became public on August 28th, members of both houses of Congress began to express concern. On August 9th, the Democratic leadership of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee wrote to the OMB and the White House warning that a hold on assistance might constitute an illegal impoundment of funds. They urged the Trump administration to follow the law and obligate the funding. When the news of the frozen aid broke on August 28th, congressional scrutiny of President Trump's decision increased. On September 3rd, a group of senators, both Republicans and Democrats, including Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Senator Rob Portman, Senator Dick Durbin, Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Richard Blumenthal, sent a letter to acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, expressing, and I quote, deep concerns that the administration is considering not obligating the Ukraine Security Initiative funds for 2019. 2 days later, as has been mentioned, on September 5th, a Washington Post editorial expressed concern that President Trump was withholding military assistance to Ukraine in order to pressure President Zelensky to announce these investigations. That was the first public report linking the frozen security aid to the investigations that Mr. Giuliani had been publicly pressing for, and that President Trump, as we've heard, had privately urged President Zelensky to conduct on the July 25th call. That same day, Senators Murphy and Johnson met with President Zelensky in Kiev. Ambassador Taylor went with them, and he testified, Mr. Taylor testified, that President Zelensky's, quote, first question to the senators was about withheld security assistance. Ambassador Taylor testified that both senators, quote, stressed that bipartisan support for Ukraine and Washington was Ukraine's most important strategic asset, and that President Zelensky should not jeopardize that bipartisan support by getting drawn into U.S. domestic politics. Now, Senator Johnson and Senator Murphy later submitted letters where they explained that they sought to reassure President Zelensky that there was bipartisan support in Congress for providing Ukraine with military assistance and that they would continue to urge President Trump to lift the hold. Here is what they said in that letter. Senator Murphy said, Senator Johnson and I assured Zelensky that Congress wanted to continue this funding and would press Trump to release it immediately. And Senator Johnson in the letter said, I explained that I'd tried to persuade the president to authorize me to announce the hold was released, but that I was unsuccessful. Now, as news of the president's hold on military assistance to Ukraine became public at the end of August, Congress, the press, the public started to pay more attention to President Trump's activities with Ukraine. This risked exposing the scheme that you've heard so much about today. By now, the White House had learned that the Inspector General of the intelligence community had found that a whistleblower complaint related to the same Ukraine matter was, quote, credible and, quote, an urgent concern, and was therefore, that they were therefore required to send that complaint to Congress. On September 9th, 3 House investigating committees sent a letter to White House counsel Pat Cipollone stating that President Trump and Giuliani, quote, appear to have acted outside legitimate law enforcement and diplomatic channels to coerce the Ukrainian government into pursuing 2 politically motivated investigations under the guise of anti-corruption activity. The letter also said this: if the president is trying to pressure Ukraine into choosing between defending itself from a Russian aggression without U.S. assistance or leveraging its judicial system to serve the ends of the Trump campaign, this would represent a staggering abuse of power, a boon to Moscow, and a betrayal of the public trust. The chairs requested that the White House preserve all relevant records and produce them by September 16th. This included the transcript, or actually the call record, of the July 25th call between President Trump and President Zelensky. Now, based on witness testimony, it looks like the White House counsel's office circulated the committee's document request around the White House. Tim Morrison, a senior director at the National Security Council, remembered seeing a copy of this letter. He also recalled that the 3 committees' Ukraine investigation was discussed at a meeting of senior-level NSC staff soon after it was publicly announced. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman recalled discussions among the NSC staff members that the investigation, and here's a quote, might have the effect of releasing the hold on Ukraine military assistance because it would be, quote, potentially politically challenging for the administration to justify that hold to Congress. Later that same day, on September 9th, the Inspector General informed the House and Senate Intelligence Committees he determined that the whistleblower complaint that had been submitted on August 12th appeared to be credible, met the definition of urgent concern under the statute, and yet, he reported, that for the first time ever, the acting director of national intelligence was withholding this whistleblower complaint from Congress. That violated the law, which required him to send it in 7 days. The acting director later testified that his office initially withheld the complaint based on the advice from the White House and an unprecedented intervention by the Department of Justice. Now, according to public reporting and testimony from the acting DNI at a hearing before the House Intelligence Committee on September 26th, the White House had been aware of the whistleblower complaint for weeks prior to the IG's September 9th letter to the intelligence committees. Acting DNI McGuire testified that when he received the whistleblower complaint from the Inspector General, his office contacted the White House counsel's office for guidance. Consistent with acting DNI McGuire's testimony, the New York Times has reported that in late August, the president's current defense counsel, Mr. Cipollone, and NSC lawyer John Eisenberg personally briefed President Trump about the complaint's existence and told the president they believed the complaint could be withheld from Congress on executive privilege grounds. Now, on September 10th, the next day, Ambassador Bolton resigned from his position as National Security Advisor. On that same day, September 10th, Chairman Schiff of the House Intelligence Committee wrote a letter to the acting director demanding that he provide the complaint as the law required. The next day, on September 11th, President Trump lifted the hold on the security assistance to Ukraine. Now, numerous witnesses have testified that they weren't aware of any reason why the hold was lifted, just as there was no explanation for the hold being implemented. There was no additional review, no additional European contribution, nothing to justify the president's change in position except he got caught. Just as there was no official explanation for why the hold on Ukrainian assistance was implemented, numerous witnesses testified that they were not provided with any reason for why the hold was lifted on September 11th. For example, Jennifer Williams, who was the special advisor to Vice President Pence, testified that she was never given a reason for that decision. Neither was Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. Here's what he told us during the hearing.
Are you also aware, however, that the security assistance hold was not lifted for another 10 days after this meeting?
That's correct.
And am I correct that you didn't learn the reason why the hold was lifted?
That's correct.
Colonel Vindman, you didn't learn a reason why the hold was lifted either, is that right?
Correct.
Colonel Vindman, are you aware that the committees launched an investigation into Ukraine matters on September 9th, 2 days before the hold was lifted?
I am aware, and I was aware.
Ambassador Taylor, the person in charge at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, who communicated the decision to the Ukrainians, also never got an explanation. Here's what he said.
Are you also aware, however, that the security assistance hold was not lifted for another 10 days after this?
9th. Finally, on September 11th, I learned that the hold had been lifted and security assistance would be provided. I was not told the reason why the hold had been lifted.
Mark Sandy, a career officer at OMB, testified he only learned of a possible rationale for the hold in early September after the acting DNI had informed the White House about the whistleblower complaint. Now, Sandy testified that sometime in early September, he received an email from his boss, Michael Duffy. Approximately 2 months after the hold had been placed, the email, quote, attributed the hold to the president's concern about other countries not contributing more to Ukraine and requested, quote, information about what additional countries were contributing to Ukraine. This was a different explanation than OMB had provided at the July 26th interagency meeting. That referenced concerns about corruption. Lieutenant Colonel testified that none of the facts on the ground about Ukrainian efforts to combat corruption or other countries' contribution to Ukraine had changed before President Trump lifted the hold. According to a press report, after Congress began investigating President Trump's scheme, the White House counsel's office opened an internal investigation relating to the July 25th call. The following slides provide excerpts from a report in the Washington Post. As part of that internal investigation, White House lawyers reportedly gathered and reviewed hundreds of documents that reveal extensive efforts to generate an after-the-fact justification for the hold on military assistance for Ukraine that had been ordered by the president. These documents reportedly include, quote, early August email exchanges between Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and White House budget officials seeking to provide an explanation for withholding the funds after the president had already ordered a hold in mid-July on the nearly $400 million in security assistance. The Washington Post article also reported that, and this is a quote, emails show OMB Director Vaught and OMB staffers arguing that withholding the aid was legal, while officials at the National Security Council and State Department protested. OMB lawyers said that it was legal to withhold the aid as long as they deemed it a temporary hold. You should be able to see these documents, but the White House has withheld them from Congress. So the House can't verify the news report, but you could. You could do that if you could see these documents. You should subpoena them, and there's no reason not to see all the relevant documents. Now, the lengthy delay created by President Trump's hold prevented the Department of Defense from spending all congressionally appropriated funds by the end of the fiscal year, as we've mentioned before. That meant the funds were going to expire on September 30th because, as we know, unused funds do not roll over to the next fiscal year. This confirmed the fears expressed by Cooper, Sandy, and others, concerns that were discussed within the relevant agencies in late July and throughout August. Ultimately, $35 million of Ukraine military assistance, that's 14% of the DoD funds, remained unspent by the end of the fiscal year in order to make sure that Ukraine did not permanently lose the $35 million of critical military assistance that had been frozen by the White House. Congress had to pass a provision on September 27th, 3 days before the funds were to expire, to ensure that the remaining $35 million could be sent to Ukraine. Now, George Kent is an anti-corruption and rule of law expert. He told us that American anti-corruption efforts prioritize building institutional capacity, support for the rule of law, not the pursuit of individual investigations, particularly of political rivals. Here's how he explained their approach.
U.S. efforts to counter corruption in Ukraine focus on building institutional capacity so that the Ukrainian government has the ability to go after corruption and effectively investigate, prosecute, and judge alleged criminal activities using appropriate institutional mechanisms. That is, to create and follow the rule of law. That means that if there are criminal nexuses for activity in the United States, U.S. law enforcement should pursue the case. If we think there's been a criminal act overseas that violates U.S. law, we have the institutional mechanisms to address that. It could be through the Justice Department and FBI agents assigned overseas, or through treaty mechanisms, such as the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. As a general principle, I do not believe the United States should ask other countries to engage in selective, politically associated investigations or prosecutions against opponents of those in power, because such selective actions undermine the rule of law, regardless of the country.
Now, David Holmes concurred during his testimony. Holmes also compared the official approach that we believe in, that we promulgate across the world, with what the president and Mr. Giuliani actually were doing.
So our long-standing policy is to encourage them to establish and build rule of law institutions that are capable and that are independent and that can actually pursue credible allegations. That's our policy. We've been doing that for quite some time with some success. So focusing on particular cases, including particular cases where there is a interest of the president's, it's just not part of what we've done. It's hard to explain why we would do that.
Unfortunately, we do know the explanation. We know why President Trump wanted President Zelensky to announce investigations, because it would help him in his election. Now, on September 18th, approximately a week before he was supposed to meet with President Trump at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, President Zelensky spoke by telephone with Vice President Pence. During her deposition, Jennifer Williams testified, and she was Vice President Pence's assistant. She testified that Vice President Pence basically reiterated that the hold on aid had been lifted and asked a bit more about how Zelensky's efforts were going. Now, following her deposition and while preparing for her testimony at the open hearing on November 19th, Williams reviewed the documents. They've not been produced to us by the White House, and those documents refreshed her recollection of Vice President Pence's call with President Zelensky. Now, the White House blocked Williams from testifying about her refreshed recollections of the Vice President's call when she appeared at the open public hearing. They claimed that certain portions of the September 18th call, including the information that Williams wanted to tell us about, were classified. On November 26th, she submitted a classified addition to her hearing testimony, where she provided additional information about the Vice President's September 18th telephone call with President Zelensky. The Intelligence Committee provided this classified addition to the Judiciary Committee. It has been sent to the Senate for your review. Now, I've read that testimony. I'll just say that a cover-up is not a proper reason to classify a document. Vice President Pence has repeatedly said publicly that he has no objection to the White House releasing the actual transcript of his calls with President Zelensky, and yet his office has refused many requests by the committee to declassify Williams' addendum so the American people could also see the additional evidence about this call. We urge the senators to review it, and we ask again that the White House declassify it. As the House wrote in 2 separate letters, there is no basis to keep it classified, and again, in case the White House needs a reminder, it's improper to keep something classified just to avoid embarrassment or to conceal wrongdoing. Now, we've been through a lot of facts today. We've seen the president's scheme, a shakedown of Ukraine for his personal benefit, was, I believe, an obvious abuse of his power. But this misconduct, the scheme, became exposed. Congress asked questions. The press reported. Non-political officers in the government expressed concern. The whistleblower laws were activated. As this happened, there was an effort to create an after-the-fact misleading record to avoid responsibility for what the president had actually been doing. These were not the only efforts to hide misconduct, and the misconduct continued. Congressman Schiff will review some of those items.
So we have about 20 minutes left in the presentation tonight. I'd like to now go through with you the president's efforts to hide this corrupt scheme, even as it continued well into the fall of last year. On August 12th, a whistleblower in the intelligence community submitted a complaint addressed to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. This explosive document stated that President Trump had solicited foreign interference from Ukraine to assist in his 2020 re-election bid. The complaint alleged a scheme by President Trump to, quote, use the power of his office to solicit interference from a foreign country in the 2020 U.S. election. The complaint stated that the president had applied pressure on Ukraine to investigate one of the president's main domestic political rivals and detailed the involvement of the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. The complaint also stated that the whistleblower believed that the president's activities, quote, pose risk to U.S. national security and undermine the U.S. government's efforts to deter and counter foreign interference in U.S. elections. Under the law, the whistleblower was required to file the complaint with the Inspector General of the intelligence community, which was then required to vet and assess the complaint and determine if it warranted reporting to the intelligence committees. The law gives the Inspector General 14 days to conduct an initial review and then inform the Director of National Intelligence about his findings. On August 26, the Inspector General sent the whistleblower complaint and the Inspector General's preliminary determination to the Acting Director of National Intelligence. The Inspector General wrote that based on his review of the complaint, its allegations constituted an urgent concern and appeared credible under the statute. The Inspector General confirmed that the whistleblower acted lawfully in bringing the complaint and credibly raised a legitimate concern that should be communicated to the intelligence committees of Congress. The Director of National Intelligence quickly informed the White House about the complaint. Under the law, the Acting Director of National Intelligence was required to forward the complaint and the Inspector General's determination to the Congressional Intelligence Committees no later than 7 days after he received it. The legal requirement is extremely clear. Upon receipt of the transmittal from the ICIG, that is the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, the Director shall, within 7 calendar days of such receipt, forward such transmittal to the Congressional Intelligence Committees together with any comments the Director considers appropriate. Yet, despite the clear letter of the law, the White House mobilized to keep the information in the whistleblower complaint from Congress, including by inviting the Department of Justice to render an opinion as to whether the complaint could be withheld from Congress. The statutory deadline of September 2nd, when the Director of National Intelligence was required to turn it over to Congress, came and went, and the complaint remained hidden from Congress. Finally, on September 9th, a full week after the complaint was required to be sent to Congress, and once again, an urgent concern, the Inspector General, 1 week after it was required to be sent to Congress, the Inspector General wrote to the leaders of the intelligence committees to inform them that the Director of National Intelligence was withholding a whistleblower complaint in direct contravention of past practice and the law. On September 24th, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi announced that the House of Representatives is moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. The next day, the House of Representatives passed a resolution calling on the Trump administration to provide the whistleblower's complaint immediately to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. Later that day, the White House publicly released the summary of the July 25th call between President Trump and President Zelensky and permitted the acting Director of National Intelligence to provide the whistleblower's complaint and related documents to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. The President himself was happy to discuss the motivations for the scheme in public. That day, in a joint press availability with President Zelensky at the United Nations General Assembly, President Trump reiterated that he wanted Ukraine to investigate the Bidens.
To do more on Joe Biden and the investigation?
No, I want him to do whatever he can. This was not his fault. He wasn't there. He's just been here recently. But whatever he can do in terms of corruption, because the corruption's massive. Now, when Biden's son walks away with millions of dollars from Ukraine and he knows nothing, and they're paying him millions of dollars, that's corruption.
Finally, the day after President Trump explained to the public that he wanted Ukraine to investigate former Vice President Biden, on the morning of September 26th, the Intelligence Committee publicly released declassified redactions of 2 documents, the whistleblower's August 12th complaint and the Inspector General's August 26th transmittal to the Acting Director of National Intelligence. Even after the impeachment inquiry into the Ukraine matter began, President Trump and his proxy, Rudy Giuliani, have continued to publicly urge President Zelensky to launch an investigation of Vice President Biden and alleged 2016 election interference by Ukraine. On September 30, during his remarks at the swearing in of the new labor secretary, President Trump stated,
Now, the new president of Ukraine ran on the basis of no corruption. That's how he got elected. And I believe that he really means it. But there was a lot of corruption having to do with the 2016 election against us. And we want to get to the bottom of it, and it's very important that we do. Thank you very much.
so here he is, this meeting at the United Nations, September 30, and he's still pursuing this bogus CrowdStrike conspiracy theory with the president of Ukraine. On October 2nd, in a public press availability, President Trump discussed the July 25th call with President Zelensky and stated the conversation was perfect, it couldn't have been nicer. He then linked his notion of corruption with the Biden investigation. On October 3rd, in remarks before he departed on Marine One, President Trump expressed his hope that Ukraine would investigate Vice President Biden and his son. President Trump actually escalated his rhetoric, urging not only Ukraine to investigate the Bidens, but China too.
What exactly did you hope Zelensky would do about the Bidens after his phone call? Exactly.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer. They should investigate the Bidens, because how does a company that's newly formed, and all these companies, if you look at, and by the way, likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens.
The same day, President Trump tweeted that he has an absolute right to investigate corruption. That really means is he feels he has an absolute right to investigate or get foreign countries to investigate his political opponents. The president sent a similar tweet the next day, once again linking corruption with the Biden investigation. As president, I have an obligation to end corruption, even if that means requesting the help of a foreign country or countries. It is done all the time. This has nothing to do with politics or a political campaign against the Bidens. This does have to do with corruption. Give him credit for being so obvious. This has nothing to do with politics or a political campaign against the Bidens, but you got to investigate the Bidens. I guess that's just a coincidence. President Trump continued to demonstrate his eagerness to solicit foreign assistance related to his personal interest. Here's what's okay. He said, if we feel there's corruption, like I feel there was in the 2016 campaign, there was tremendous corruption against me. If we feel there's corruption, we have a right to go to a foreign country. President Trump added that asking President Xi of China to investigate the Bidens is certainly something we can start thinking about. Even last month, the president and Giuliani's scheme continued. During the first week of December, Giuliani traveled to Budapest, Kyiv, and Vienna to meet with the former Ukrainian government officials as part of a continuing effort to dig up dirt, political dirt, on Vice President Biden and advance the theory that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election. Asked about his interviews of foreign Ukrainian prosecutors, Giuliani told the New York Times that he was acting on behalf of his client, President Trump. Quote, like a good lawyer, I am gathering evidence to defend my client against the false charges being leveled against him. Indeed, evidence obtained by the House from Giuliani's associate confirms that he had been representing himself in as early as May 2019 as President Trump's personal lawyer, doing Donald J. Trump's personal bidding in his dealings with Ukraine. This letter, May 10th, 2019, from Giuliani to Zelensky, says, among other things, however, I have a more specific request. In my capacity as personal counsel to President Trump and with his knowledge and consent, I request a meeting with you on this upcoming Monday, May 13th, or Tuesday, May 14th. I will need no more than a half an hour of your time, and I will be accompanied by my colleague, Victoria Tensing, a distinguished American attorney who is very familiar with this matter. Please have your office let me know what time or times are convenient for you, and Victoria and I will be there. So this is evidence recently obtained showing his effort to get that meeting in May with Zelensky. Giuliani told the Wall Street Journal that when he returned to New York from this most recent trip on December 7th, President Trump called him as his plane was still taxiing down the runway. "What did you get?" he said, President Trump asked. "More than you can imagine," Giuliani replied. Giuliani claimed that he was putting his findings into a 20-page report that the president had asked him to brief the Attorney General and the Republicans in Congress. Shortly thereafter, on the same day, President Trump told reporters before departing on Marine One that he was aware of Giuliani's efforts in Ukraine and that Giuliani was going to report his purported findings to the Attorney General and Congress.
Well, I just know he came back from someplace and he's going to make a report, I think, to the Attorney General and to Congress. He says he has a lot of good information. I have not spoken to him about that information, but Rudy, as you know, has been one of the great crime fighters of the last 50 years. And he did get back from Europe just recently, and I know he has not told me what he's found, but I think he wants to go before Congress and say, and also to the Attorney General and the Department of Justice, I hear he's found plenty, yeah.
3 days after that, those remarks, on December 10th, Giuliani confirmed to the Washington Post that President Trump had asked him to brief the Justice Department and Republican senators on his, quote, findings, unquote, from his trip to Ukraine. Giuliani stated, "He wants me to do it. I'm working on pulling it together and hope to have it done by the end of the week." That Friday, December 13th, Giuliani reportedly met with President Trump at the White House. And on December 17th, Giuliani confirmed to CNN that President Trump has been very supportive of his efforts to dig up dirt on Vice President Biden in Ukraine and that they are on the same page. The following day, on December 18, 2019, the House of Representatives approved the 2 articles of impeachment you are considering in this trial. Since the House voted on these articles, evidence has continued to come to light related to the president's corrupt scheme. Among other things, Freedom of Information Act lawsuits, press reporting, and documents provided to Congressman Rudy Giuliani, Associate Lev Parnas, further corroborate what we already know about the president's scheme. As Giuliani again said on December 17th, President Trump has been, quote, very supportive, unquote, of his efforts to dig up dirt on Vice President Biden, and they are, quote, on the same page. Parnas further corroborated what we already know about President Trump's scheme, that he was responsible for withholding military aid and sustaining that hold, and that his personal attorney, Mr. Giuliani, was working at the direction of President Trump himself. On December 20th, new emails were released showing that 91 minutes after President Trump's call with the Ukrainian President Zelensky, a top Office of Management and Budget aide asked the Department of Defense to hold off on sending military aid to Ukraine. So those were new documents that came on December 20th. On December 29th, revelations emerged from OMB Director and Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney's role about that role in the delay of aid and efforts by lawyers at OMB, the Department of Justice, and the White House to justify the delay and the alarm that the delay caused within the administration. Those records just became available on December 29th. On January 2nd, newly unredacted Pentagon emails which raised serious concerns by Trump administration officials about the legality of the president's hold on aid became available. On January 6th, former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton announced that he would comply with a Senate subpoena compelling his testimony. His lawyers stated that he has new relevant information. On January 13th, reports emerged that the Russian government hacked the Ukrainian gas company Burisma almost certainly in an effort to find information about Vice President Joe Biden's son in order to weaponize that information against Mr. Biden and in favor of Mr. Trump, just as Russia did against Secretary Clinton in favor of then candidate Trump in 2016. That brings us up to January 13th of this year. Last week, House committees received new evidence from Lev Parnas that further demonstrates that the president was a central player in this scheme to pressure Ukraine for his political gain. And also last week, the Government Accountability Office found that President Trump violated the law when he withheld that aid. Last night, we had a further development when more redacted emails from the Office of Management and Budget were produced. I think Representative Cruz showed you these. These are among the documents that were just released. I'm sure that if we could read under those redactions, it would be a very perfect email. But you have to ask, what is being redacted here? What is so important to keep confidential during the course of an impeachment inquiry? As you can see, right up until last night, evidence continues to be produced. The truth is going to come out. Indeed, the truth has already come out, but more and more of it will. More emails are going to come out. More witnesses are going to come forward. They're going to have more relevant information to share. And the only question is, do you want to hear it now? Do you want to know the full truth now? Do you want to know just who was in the loop? Sounds like everyone was in the loop. You want to know how broad this scheme was? We have the evidence to prove that President Trump ordered the aid withheld. He did so to coerce Ukraine to help his re-election campaign. He withheld a White House meeting to coerce the same sham investigations. We can and will prove President Trump guilty of this conduct and of obstructing the investigation into his misconduct. But you and the American people should know who else was involved in this scheme. You should want the whole truth to come out. You should want to know about every player in this sordid business. It isn't within your power to do so. And I would urge you, even if you're prepared to vote to convict and impeach and remove this president, to find out the full truth about how far this corruption goes. Because I think the public has a right to know. Now, yesterday we made the case for why you should hear this additional evidence and testimony. This morning I introduced you to the broad sweep of the president's conduct. And then during the course of today, we walked you through a factual chronology in real time about how this plot unfolded. And during that factual chronology today, you saw that in March of this year, Giuliani began that smear campaign against Ambassador Yovanovitch in order to get her fired by President Trump, something he would later admit was necessary to get her out of the way because she was going to be in the way of these two investigations. This is the supposed anti-corruption effort by the president to get rid of a woman who has dedicated her career to representing the United States, often in dangerous parts of the world, to fighting corruption and to promoting the rule of law. This plot begins with getting her out of the way, with the president saying that she's going to go through some things. This anti-corruption reformer, this U.S. patriot, this plot begins with getting her out of the way. And tellingly, and this says so much about the administration. Tellingly, it wasn't enough just to recall her or fire her. The president could have done that any time. No, they wanted to destroy her because she had the audacity to stand in their way. So we heard in March about the effort to get rid of her, and it succeeded. And guess what message that sent to the Ukrainians?
If Adam Schiff could cry in the wrap-up
About
phase
the
here, I think
power
it would
the
be
president's
great.
lawyer has. The Ukrainians were watching this whole saga. They were hearing his interviews. They were seeing the smears that he was putting out. And this attorney for the president, working hand in hand with these corrupt Ukrainians, was able to get a UN ambassador yanked out of her job. Proof positive. You want a window to this president, you want entree to this president, you want to make things happen with this president, you go through his lawyer. Never mind the State Department, never mind the National Security Council, never mind the Defense Department, you go through his lawyer. That's March. April, Zelensky has this huge victory in the presidential election. He gets a congratulatory call from the president. The president assigns Vice President Pence to go to the inauguration. May, Giuliani is rebuffed by Zelensky, cancels the trip to Ukraine, the one where he wanted to go, remember, meddle in the investigation. Because Giuliani says enemies of Trump surround Zelensky. I guess that means he didn't get the meeting and they must be enemies of the president. Of course, the Ukrainians know why he wants that meeting. May, Trump disinvites Pence to the inauguration. Pence is going, Giuliani's rebuffed, Pence ain't going. That's May. Instead, May 23rd, we have this meeting at the White House, and there's a new party in town, the Three Amigos. They're going to be handling the Ukraine portfolio. And they're told, work with Rudy. Work with Rudy. Ambassador Sondland, Ambassador Volker, Secretary Perry. Work with Rudy. And as you saw in June, Giuliani's pushing for these investigations. And they're trying to arrange these meetings and trying to make this happen. And also in June, the Defense Department announces they're going to release the military aid. And the president reads about this. And then he stops it. He stops the aid. In July, on July 10th, you heard in the chronology, there's that meeting at the White House. The meeting in which Sondland blurts out in this meeting between Ukrainians and Americans, hey, they've got a deal. They're trying to get this meeting, and there's a debate about whether the meeting is going to happen and when it's going to happen, and Sondland says, hey, we've got a deal with Mulvaney here. We're going to get this meeting, and you're going to do those investigations. And Bolton stiffens and abruptly ends the meeting. That was the first meeting that day, and then Sondland brings the delegation to a different part of the White House, and they have the follow-up meeting where he makes it even more explicit. This drug deal is made even more explicit. And Dr. Hill is told by Ambassador Bolton, you need to go talk to the lawyers. I don't want any part of this drug deal they're cooking up. That's July. July is the month where that email goes from Sondland to Pompeo and others, and everybody is in the loop. July is the month where the hold is implemented with no explanation. July is the month where Mueller testifies about Russia's systemic interference in our affairs. July is the month after Mueller testifies that the president believes he has escaped accountability. The next day in July is, of course, the July 25th call, in which the president asks for his favor. And July is the month, July 26th is the date of the call between President Trump and Ambassador Sondland. You know the one. Zelensky loves your ass. He'll do anything you want. Is he going to do the investigation? Yeah, he's going to do the investigation. July is the month of that conversation between Sondland and David Holmes, where Holmes says, can you tell me candidly here what the president thinks of Ukraine? Does he give a blank about Ukraine? No, he doesn't give a blank about Ukraine. He only cares about the big stuff. Well, there's kind of big stuff here in Ukraine, like a war with the Russians. No. Big stuff that affects him personally, like the Biden investigation that Giuliani wants. That's the month of July. August, we have that meeting between Giuliani and Yermak in Madrid. August, we have the back and forth about the statement. No, you go first. And you commit and publicly announce the investigations, and then we'll give you a date. No, you go first. You give us the date, and then we'll announce the investigations. Well, we'll give you a statement that doesn't mention the specifics. No, you give us a statement that mentions the investigations. That's the month of August. August is also the month where it becomes clear that it's not just the meeting anymore. It's everything. Everything is conditioned on these investigations. The relationship, the money, the meeting. Sondland and Holmes testify it's as simple as 2 + 2 = 4. That's August. September, Sondland says to Yermak, everything is conditioned on public announcements. So message delivered, no ambiguity. The Ukrainians are told quid pro quo. Taylor texts, this is crazy, to withhold aid. September's the month, September 7th in particular, Trump and Sondland talk on the phone, and the president has that conversation where he says, no quid pro quo, except here's the quid pro quo. Zelensky's got to go to the mic, and what's more, he should want to do it. September is also the month where the investigations begin in Congress. September's the month where after those investigations begin, after the president knows he's been caught, the aid is finally released. And September is the month where Pence and Zelensky are on the phone, and Jennifer Williams has classified information to share with you that I hope you will take a look at because it is relevant to these issues. That's September. October, Trump admits, yes, if it wasn't obvious enough, he wants Ukraine to investigate his political opponent. October is the month where he invites another nation, China, to investigate his opponent. This is the broad outline of the chronology that we went through today. Tomorrow, we will go through the law, the Constitution, and the facts as they apply to Article 1.
Yeah, Republicans don't care about those things.
We've introduced the case. We've gone through the chronology, and tomorrow we will apply the facts to the law as it pertains to the president's abuse of power. And let me just conclude this evening by remarking again on what brought us here. What brought us here is that some courageous people came forward. Courageous people that risked their entire careers. And one of the things that's been so striking to me about that as I watch these witnesses like Maria Yovanovitch and Ambassador Taylor and David Holmes and others, Dr. Hill, is how much these dedicated officials were willing to risk their career, the beginning of their career or the middle of their career or late in their career, when they had everything to lose. But people senior to them who have every advantage, who sit in positions of power, lack that same basic commitment, lack that same basic willingness to put their country first and expose wrongdoing. Why is it that Colonel Vindman, who worked for Fiona Hill, who worked for John Bolton and Dr. Kupperman? Why is it that they were willing to stick their neck out and answer lawful subpoenas when their bosses wouldn't? I don't know that I can answer that question, but I just can tell you I have such admiration for the fact they did. I think, and I think this is some form of cosmic justice, that this ambassador that was so ruthlessly smeared is now a hero for her courage. There is justice in that. But what will really vindicate that leap of faith that she took is if we show the same courage. They risked everything, their careers. And yes, I know what you're asked to decide may risk yours too. But if they could show the courage, so can we. I yield back.
Wow. Wow. What a day. What a day. Presumably some kind of wrap up and plan to resume tomorrow.
Pursuant to the provisions of Senate Resolution 243 of the 100th Congress, a single one-page classified document identified by the House managers for filing with the Secretary of the Senate that will be received on January 22nd, 2020, shall not be made part of the public record and shall not be printed, but shall be made available pursuant to the standing order from the 100th Congress. The Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. Chief Justice, colleagues, we're almost through for the evening. We'll convene again at 1 o'clock tomorrow. Before we adjourn, I'd like to acknowledge that tomorrow is the official last day for this term's Senate pages. This group of...
Wow. What a heartwarming moment. We're going to get to your comments via Super Chat right after this, so feel free to send those in. I'll hang as long as there are questions and comments via Super Chat, then we'll wrap and reconvene.
In addition to witnessing this unusual event that we're all experiencing, they're studying for their final exams as well, and we wish them well as they head off back to boring normal high school.
Mr. Leader, let me just add my thanks and gratitude for all of us. It is rare, particularly these days, when 100 senators from both sides of the aisle of every political persuasion get up and give someone a standing ovation. But you deserve it. Thank you for your good work, and we hope you have beautiful and successful lives.
Well said, Chuck. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chief Justice, I ask unanimous consent that on Tuesday, January the 28th, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., while the Senate is sitting as a court of impeachment, and that notwithstanding the Senate's adjournment, the Senate can receive House messages and executive matters, committees be authorized to report legislation and executive matters, and senators be allowed to submit statements for the record, bills, resolutions, and co-sponsor requests, and where applicable, the Secretary of the Senate, on behalf of the presiding officer, be permitted to refer such matters.
Without objection, so ordered.
Finally, I ask unanimous consent that the trial adjourn until 1 p.m. Thursday, January 23rd, and this also constitute the adjournment of the Senate.
Without objection, so ordered. Senate is adjourned.
An incredible day, truly an incredible day. Adam Schiff laying out the case, big picture, against Donald Trump. And tomorrow they will continue with the second day, hours 9 through 16. We will stay right here. I have a bunch of super chats. I see people getting very, very worked up that I may have missed theirs. I'm going to go right back to where we left off during the last break. We will do super chats for a little while. I will do new member announcements. Maybe we could get to 123. I'm just saying, you know, we're here. Let's do it. We're only 20 away. 103 would be a weird number to end on. So I invite you to take advantage of the we are celebrating impeachment with a coupon code Impeach50 that saves you 50%. Okay, let's get right to what is on people's minds. Azim Abu Khalil says, are Senate Republicans starting to turn on McConnell? I did not see evidence of that. I have not seen evidence of that so far. Quirky Quips says, can Justice Roberts say anything about missing senators or strike them or fine them? He could. There's been no real indication that Justice Roberts is actually going to hold Republicans accountable to the rules. As I mentioned earlier, it was reported that, and maybe I can even pull up the tweet. Well, let's stay on this for now. It was reported earlier by a reporter in the room that when Adam Schiff was giving his earlier remarks, 21 of the 53 Republicans were just gone. They were just gone. And of course, I tweeted at D. Pacman jokingly, how will they know whether to acquit or convict if they don't see the testimony, the arguments? Of course, we know it doesn't matter. They've already made the decision on that. Punisher 38 says it's up to the CJ himself to enforce attendance. That's right. It is up to John Roberts. He's not going to do it, though. Jay Harper says, if Schiff cried, wouldn't it feed into the beta male narrative that Trumpists love to accuse liberals of being? Probably. I wasn't seriously saying Schiff should cry, but he does speak very eloquently and emotionally, but not in a negative way, just with emotion. John McKinney says, why isn't Catcher in the Rye on your book recommendations? It's my favorite book of all time. Not every book is on my list of book recommendations at davidpacman.com/recommendations. Many books are. It's really books I've read in adulthood. I haven't read that since middle school or whenever you read it. So that's why it is not there. Thanks to Also Ran for becoming a soy boy by signing up for a YouTube subscription. Jay Harper says Schiff is an eloquent speaker. Future senator or president. Adam Schiff seems to have a big career in front of him. He might only be like in his late 40s. Is Schiff 49 or 50 or something like that? He could have a long time ahead of him for sure. Sabrina Zafar checking in with the message, love you, David. Hey, Sabrina, good to see you. I've met Sabrina in person, and Sabrina's here in Boston. Great to see you. Glad you've been here. Or I guess I don't know if you have. You sent the super chat a few minutes ago. I know you've been here 4 minutes anyway. James Montalbano says, have you ever referred to him as President Trump in your private life in earnest? Of course not. No, I just say Trump. I realized today that I never have and never will. Okay. All right. Thank you, James. Very, very interesting. Okay. Any other questions or comments that people have? I'll stay if the questions continue to come in. Super chat is the $ at the bottom of the chat if you're on a desktop computer, and it is sort of an overlay $ if you are on mobile. If you don't know if you're on a desktop computer or on mobile, you're probably not going to be. I'm not expecting you to send a super chat. Let me put it that way. If you're unaware of whether you are on a computer or on a mobile phone. Madeline Welsh, not pleased with the comment about Catcher in the Rye. Madeline Welsh says Catcher in the Rye isn't that good. Madeline, there's a lot of people who actually feel that way. A lot of people have told me, a lot of people don't know this, that there are lots of people that feel very strongly against Catcher in the Rye. And they, quite frankly, don't really care too much about Holden Caulfield. Caulfield? Hope I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. But anyway, we don't have to argue about Catcher in the Rye. We have much bigger things. Let's go to, I want to check Donald Trump's Twitter account to see if he's been tweeting any other nonsense recently. No, it's just a bunch of retweets, continuing to retweet nonsense, Doug Collins nonsense, and so on and so forth. Let me see if I can find, let me see that tweet that I mentioned earlier. Oh, here it is. Let's see, where was that tweet? Here it is. Here's the tweet from Michael McAuliffe. Just counted 21 empty seats on the Republican side of the Senate, 2 on the Democratic side, a couple hours into Schiff's presentation. Some are just stretching their legs, but most are not in the chamber. Some of them have been out there for a while. Yeah, that's not the way it's supposed to go. You're supposed to be there for the testimony. Ryan Henry Dean weighing in via Super Chat says Catcher in the Rye is actually incredible. Okay, so, you know, it's a book. People can have different opinions about it. We know Donald Trump Oh, Angus King with a banana, coming in out of nowhere with a banana. It's a hand banana. Love Angus King, getting potassium and all sorts of nutriments, as one of my teachers used to say. People can disagree about Catcher in the Rye. It's harder to disagree about, you know, Trump obstructed justice. But we can certainly all respectfully disagree about Catcher in the Rye. I see a few messages from people saying that the coupon code is not working. The coupon code is absolutely working. Let me walk you through it. Joinpacman.com, joinpacman.com, joinpacman.com. Works on monthly, works on yearly. You click sign up. Coupon code field, impeach 50. As soon as you tab off of this field, the price drops by 50%. Working. Beautiful thing. Beautiful, beautiful thing. This is a busy time of day for the website, people getting today's podcast and whatnot, so that may slow things down. So today, Democrats had 8 hours, House managers, I should call them. House managers had 8 hours. They used 7 hours and 15 minutes, meaning they still have, you know, a whole bunch of hours remaining, certainly more than enough for 2 very, very full days upcoming. Captain Crunch says, David, in 2016, Hillary destroyed Bernie in California. California tends to be not as progressive as Massachusetts, in my opinion. What are the chances California goes Biden? Is California a must-win for Bernie? Neither. Let me explain this to you fine folks. Let me see if I can pull up the polling data. We'll look at California. So right now in California, there's conflicting polls. Let me zoom this in. There we go. So one poll says Biden 30, Bernie 20. Another poll says Biden 24, Bernie 27. Another poll says Biden 19, Bernie 26. Here's the thing about California. It is proportional apportionment. Does that make sense? Proportional apportionment. It is pro rata apportionment of delegates. So if Bernie gets 20% of the vote and Biden gets 30, they roughly get 20 and 30% of the delegates respectively. If Biden is 24, 27, whatever, right? It's proportional apportionment. So it is unlikely to be make or break for anybody. Okay, looks like things have gone. Are we still? Oh, they are still alive. So no, it's not. It's an unlikely state to make or break it for anybody. Z's private YouTube says bananas are enslaved potassium. # free potassium. That's a movement I think we can all get behind. Jay Harper says, what keeps you happy or positive in life? I've been down lately. I recommend taking a break from politics over the weekend. That is something I recommend to everybody. All sorts of things happening here, and it looks like they have indeed wrapped for the day. So what I recommend is have planned breaks from politics. I want to welcome Brandon Jett as the newest David Pakman Show member. Brandon is new member number 104 of the impeachment streams. Our goal is 123 new members. There's no reason, nothing special about 123. It's just, you know, it's the goal. The number is 123. We are at 104. And I really appreciate every one of the 104. Okay, on that note, I think that is probably enough for today. We will pick it back up tomorrow. Oh, somebody's keeping me here with a super chat. How annoying would that be if every time I'm ready to wrap, someone sends a super chat? X is asking, call into C-SPAN tonight or otherwise. C-SPAN may be done. I'm not, let me see what is going on. C-SPAN Live. Let me pull up a different feed. C-SPAN may be done, but I'd consider trying to call into C-SPAN. Let's see what is going on C-SPAN. It'll just take me a moment here. I've got to figure out what my credentials are. Let's see here. Nope, those were not the right ones. That's too bad. Try another set of credentials. Oh man, that's not it either. All right, I'm going to try one more set of credentials, and then if not, that might have to be it. Ah, there we go. I got him. Okay, C-SPAN Live. I guess it is C-SPAN 2 that is the one we should be taking a look at. Let's see what is happening.
Your unfiltered view of government, created by cable in 1979.
Everything
Will
going
there be
wrong.
witnesses or not? So that's probably a day.
What's your prediction on where?
My prediction is the president of the United States will be acquitted of the.
On the witnesses.
All right, we'll see. If they start taking calls, then maybe I will go ahead and try to call in. Daughter of Slaughter says, David, you're looking fresh and clean, especially in your button-ups. Any way you could teach Sam Cedar how to iron a dress shirt? I'd be glad to. I was actually, someone called into my show earlier and referred to Sam as Sam Cider, which is hilarious because he is all into apples, which is an interesting thing to be into. I find apples interesting. And I was texting with him earlier. We commiserated about YouTube, we commiserated about YouTube. I would love to teach Sam to iron. Anytime he wants, I will teach him. Daniel Jerub says, I love what you do, David. Add me on Lee Chess, Danny J1. I'll hit you with a correspondence game tonight. Okay, we'll see about that. Yeah, I get so many requests. I'm David Pacman on chess.com, and I'm Pacman David on Lee Chess. And I get so many requests that I tend to just ignore them, quite frankly, because it gets a little bit hectic. And it gets hard to keep up with all the games, and then people get mad, and it just gets very, very crazy. All right, that does it for me today. We'll pick it back up tomorrow. Thanks.